Okay, that was really short. Oh, I guess they're bringing the jury in. Been wondering what that is in that recessed area behind the bench up high. Haven't been able to figure it out.
Attorney Chase, had you communicated that part? Yeah, if you would.
Oh, they need to ask the defendant if he's going to testify.
All right, is the defense ready to proceed with closing? If I may, Judge, please. Ladies and gentlemen, first thing I want to do is thank you all for being attentive. I thank you. John thanks you. It was clear that everybody paid especially close attention to some very difficult evidence. I want to thank you all for doing so. Timothy Pouliot's death is tragic, but it is not murder. Let's start again at the beginning of the evening of January 27th, 2023. Now, you heard from a number of witnesses, and you're going to see video, still images. And what I'm going to ask all of you to do, and we talked about this at the beginning of the trial, is use your common sense. It is now time for you to evaluate the evidence. I want you to pay particular attention to the things that people say, but also to the other ways in which people communicate their intentions, their body language, what they say, how they act. And when you're evaluating the images and videos and statements of everybody that you've heard from, I want you to take all of that into consideration when you evaluate the evidence of the events on the 27th and the 28th. Now, you've heard from the state's witnesses, one of whom, Olivia, a friend of Abby, somebody who knew John, testified. And what she testified was they were all coming to the GOAT that evening, and eventually John was meeting up with Abby. They were in some kind of a relationship, or they knew each other, or they had previously dated. And John walks up to the group when they're inside the GOAT. And Abby knows John, and John knows Abby. And you see the video. And there's no sound, but you can see that they're clearly familiar with each other. And John walks up at the same moment that Timothy Pouliot, Trenton Nash, and Michael Mendoza are talking to them. And you heard Olivia talk about what the vibe was with Trenton Nash, Michael Mendoza, and Timothy Pouliot. She described that it was a little creepy, or she was uncomfortable, and John walks up. And you also heard that she said that John said something like, hey, you got to leave, to Timothy, or you got to get lost. Or maybe he used a derogatory term like he's scum. But that's not all that happened at that moment. Review the video. Trenton Nash and Michael Mendoza walk off the screen, leaving Timothy there speaking to John Delee. John Delee doesn't have his hands up. John Delee isn't pushing him away. John Delee has his hands open. He's opening his body up. He doesn't feel like he's under threat. And at the end of that, back and forth, John offers Timothy Pouliot a handshake. They dap up, and Timothy walks off. And then they continue to socialize and enjoy the evening. But then Olivia tells you something else, that when they go back up to the bar to get additional drinks, they overhear Trenton Nash, Mike Mendoza, and Timothy Pouliot talking about how they're professional fighters and that they're going to knock John out. And it's not that they just overhear this. It's not that they just overhear it. It is said in a way to communicate to those young women in that moment what their intentions are. And so Olivia told you that her and Abby walked down and they warned John, look out, those guys are coming for you. They want to knock you out. That's a warning. That's a communication. And then you see more video of John, right? We see John down there at the bottom of the ramp, continuing to have a good time. And then he walks up to the bar. And he has another confrontation with Timothy. And this time it's not so friendly, right? This time there's some harsh language, there's a shove, and a bouncer intervenes. And you heard from Brian Delaney. Now, Brian Delaney said that they were shit-talking each other. And he pulls John aside and he says to John, what are you doing? You're huge. You're huge. What are you doing shit-talking this guy? And when Brian and John part ways, when he sends John back down to the dance floor, what did Brian tell you? They kind of laughed it off. They chuckled it off. As far as John is concerned, his body language, his communication, this is over. This is over. And when Brian goes to talk to Timothy Pouliot, what does Timothy Pouliot say? I'm not worried. I'm an MMA fighter. I do MMA. And then Brian told you he knew what that meant. That's two times that it's been communicated what's going to happen. They're going to try to knock John out. So far, it's only words. It's words. And then we see another video. And that's the video. And we start off with the picture of the dance floor. And you see Trenton Nash, Mike Mendoza in the middle of the dance floor. And they're talking to each other and they're dapping each other up and they're talking to their buddies. You see Timothy Pouliot walk down the ramp. And for a brief moment, Timothy Pouliot leans in to Mike Mendoza. And I suggest to you, he whispers something in his ear. And then Mike Mendoza turns, takes one or two steps, throws a haymaker at John Delee. Then you see them both go down. Now we have Officer Smith. Now, Officer Smith testified that he's a detail officer. His job is to be the police presence. His job is to be there to keep the peace. And you have body-worn camera, first-hand, front row seat to that response. And I submit to you that at 22 seconds, you're going to learn everything you need to know about Mike Mendoza. You're going to see Mike Mendoza mouth on that camera, I don't know, or I have no idea. But that's for you to decide. And you're going to see Mike Mendoza's rings. And then as soon as that audio comes on, you're going to see John Delee's face, freshly cut from being ambushed by Mike Mendoza at the behest of Timothy Pouliot. And we heard from Michael Mendoza. The same Michael Mendoza that claimed to police the evening of that he didn't start anything. He didn't go after anybody, that John was the aggressor. And he did that the night of. From the moment that Mike Mendoza throws a punch and has his first interaction with a police officer, he's minimizing his involvement. He's not telling the truth. And he came in here today and told you, well, as soon as I saw the video, well, yeah, he was confronted with the truth of what he had done and what he set into motion. You hear John saying, "Who punched me? Come fight me." He got punched in the face. And you heard Mr. Mendoza say, well, I threw multiple punches at him. And you see Mr. Mendoza get guided out, and you see Trenton Nash follow him out. And then they just put John Delee and his friends right out on the same sidewalk. And you see Officer Smith's body-worn camera follow John out. But Officer Smith doesn't walk back out onto that street to make sure that the two combatants aren't put there together. He stops. He turns off his body-worn camera. But just before he does, you hear John say again, "Somebody sucker punched me. Did you see that?" And now John's out on the street. And we have video again of John on the street. And we have video of Trenton Nash and Michael Mendoza going to that car. Now, Mike Mendoza came up to you again and said to you, Trenton Nash never got in the car. There was an ice bank, a snow bank. He couldn't even get in the car. They get in the car, both of them. And they're in the car for a little bit of time. And then Trenton Nash gets out of the car and he starts walking across the street. Now, Trenton Nash came in here and told you, I was going to go smoke a cigarette. But he crosses the street and approaches the people he just saw get into a fight in the bar. He clearly knows who John Delee is. He's been around John Delee previously in the evening. He just saw his buddy Michael get into a fight with him. And so he walks up to him. He walks up to him. And of course, John notices this. He sees somebody in a dark coat and a white hat who he probably saw before earlier in the evening. And that guy's coming towards him. At the same time, he's yelling, "Who punched me?" So he thinks that Trenton Nash is coming towards him because Trenton Nash was involved. And you see a defensive, hurt, upset, amped up John Delee reach out and shove or punch Trenton Nash. Then you see John Delee reach out and try to shake his hand. And then there's another punch. And what does Mike Mendoza do, who's sitting in his car watching all of this? He doesn't make a decision to walk away. He doesn't decide that it's none of his business or he had his shot, he got his shot in, and he already jumped John in the bar. He decides to get out and add a weapon to all of this. And he crosses the street with the pepper spray behind his back, and you can see that on the video from the garage. He crosses the street with the weapon concealed and points it at John. Now, Mr. Mendoza, again, has consistently minimized his involvement in all of this. But you heard Officer Smith talk about what the effects of pepper spray are.
Silent Night, only in theaters December 1st.
And if you watch the video, John notices that Michael Mendoza is standing on the snowbank with the pepper spray in his hand, pointing at him. And at this point, seeing pepper spray pointed at him, he pulls a gun out of his waistband. He drops it because he's not expecting to have to defend himself from somebody with a weapon. But he picks it up and you see him rack the slide. Why is that important? John didn't go into the goat that night with a loaded firearm. But now he's under threat. He has two people who have approached him outside of the goat after he was jumped inside of the goat. Doesn't know who these people are. He doesn't know what their problem with him is. All he knows is that they keep coming at him. And now they have a weapon that can leave him disabled, unable to protect himself. But he doesn't point the gun at Michael Mendoza. He pulls the gun out, he loads it, and it remains at his side. And it's at this point that you've heard multiple witnesses tell you that they begin to push John up the street. That's credible and that's normal. You can watch that video for yourself and make your own decision. What's most important is John moves in that direction. And Matt Soldano told you why. That is where safety is. The car is at the Market Basket parking lot down that alleyway. They need to get out of there. Matt Soldano knows that, and that's what they tried to do. But Mike Mendoza and Trenton Nash have no interest in seeing them get to that car. Mike Mendoza's car is in the opposite direction. It's across the street from the goat. Trenton Nash's car is either 10 or 15 minutes away, or it's in the Bank of America parking lot. It depends on who you want to believe, Mike Mendoza or Trenton Nash. But they're not moving towards their car. Look at the body language of everybody in that video. Mike Mendoza is lifting a middle finger into the air and screaming at John Delee and his friends as he walks in the same direction that they do, following them up Old Granite Street. John Delee and Matt Soldano are trying to get back to their car, and these two people who have attacked John twice are following them. Where's Timothy Pouliot? There's video of Timothy leaving the goat and walking in the opposite direction for a short period of time down Old Granite Street, away from the Soho. But he stops. He turns around. He looks to see where Mike Mendoza and Trenton Nash are and where John Delee is, and he turns around and he follows. You heard from Brendan Enright. Brendan Enright doesn't know any of these people. He doesn't know John Delee. He doesn't know Timothy Pouliot. He doesn't know Mike Mendoza. He doesn't know Trenton Nash. He doesn't know Matt Soldano. He's just on the street. And what does he hear? Hey, pussy, this is New Hampshire. We all have guns. And then he turns as Timothy Pouliot walks next to him, and he warns Timothy, that guy's got a gun. You don't want any of that. But Timothy doesn't stop. Michael Mendoza yells out, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. Nobody stops following John Delee and John Delee's friends. They keep going. wherever you think they might have gone, or wherever they think they might have gone, it's on video. It's on video every step of the way, with the brief exception of that blind spot right outside of the Soho. They go from the goat, and in the case of Timothy Pouliot, from further down, all the way up the street to the corner of that alleyway. Nobody stops, nobody goes back to their car, nobody thinks better of it. As John is making his way back to his car with his friends, 3 people follow him, yelling and screaming, he's got a gun. You saw video of Abby Elliott running up the street, trying to stop Timothy Pouliot. That doesn't work. Now, you're going to see video again of the Soho. And we see the alleyway, and we see the area in front of that restaurant. And we see the pursuit. And you see the body language. Chandler Gage was identified on video by the detective, of Matt Soldano, who identified himself and was identified by the detective, waving at anybody who will look at them and listen. Stop, get back, stay away. And you heard Matt Soldano say that when he heard that they were being followed, when he realized that they were being followed, he told John to not go down the alleyway. Why? Because nothing good happens in a dark alleyway. This isn't about retribution. It's about the relentlessness of the 3 people that pursued John Delee up the street that evening. Michael Mendoza is armed with pepper spray and rings on his hands that he admits to having, that you can see for yourself. John knows that. He saw the pepper spray. These people intend to do him harm. It's not one person. It's not 2 people. It's 3 people. At some point, the decision is made to not go down that alleyway. He turns his back and he's in danger. He makes a choice to stay in the light, to stay where there are people. People in light means safety. That's your common sense. And so he stands where he is. And he doesn't point a gun at anybody. He doesn't threaten anybody. He stands there with his friends, hoping that this is going to calm down. But it doesn't. And you don't see John throw punches or shoves or point a weapon or do anything like that in any of those videos. And then Timothy Pouliot, the MMA fighter, and Mike Mendoza, who has already threatened John with a weapon, and Trenton Nash are now arrayed within arm's length of John Delee at the end of the street across from the alleyway. And then you heard Matt Soldano tell you that he got searched for a weapon and asked, do you have a gun? And you heard what that made Matt feel like. He knew why they were asking him that question. And he puts his hands up and he walks away. In that moment, John is alone, 3-on-1, against 3 people who have not only told him they want to harm him, who have not only communicated in very clear terms that they are capable of harming him, they have already tried twice. He's at a road. But he doesn't point his gun at anybody. He stands there, and he's staring right at Mike Mendoza. And then Timothy Pouliot throws that punch, the professional fighter, the MMA fighter, and you see John take a step back and fire 8 or 9 straight shots. It's on video. You get to see that. Now, Ayla came and told you that she heard different. She said, well, no, I saw 4 shots and then shots while Timothy was on the ground. That's not what the physical evidence shows you and tells you. You see the cell phone video, you see the bullets hitting the ground, and then you see Timothy fall backwards. And you see him twist to the left and to the right, but he never stops facing John. As soon as the threat of Timothy attacking John is gone, John stops. The police seized his firearm. You watched Officer Smith respond. He's the closest officer at all times. He's the closest in the bar. He's the closest on the street. He makes it up there in minutes. John is there. He has not run away. He has not left the scene. He has stayed. He immediately places his firearm on the ground, and the officer immediately stands over it to secure it. A detective comes and collects that firearm. They secure it. They render it safe. And you've heard testimony from the state's expert, the state's own detective, that there were 5 rounds left. John didn't start shooting and keep shooting. John shot until the threat was gone. He stopped when there were no longer 3 people arrayed in front of him, intending to do him harm. He stopped when Timothy hit the ground. He didn't stand over Timothy. He stepped away into the alleyway. The police came and he surrendered. Your job is a difficult one. In the moment that John stood there on the street, nowhere else to go, arrayed with 3 people in front of him that he knows mean to do him harm and are capable of it. He believes they're capable of it because it's been communicated to him. They're professionals. They're willing to throw a punch. They're willing to throw a sucker punch. They're willing to pursue him up the street that all of you walked. That's not a short distance. That's not one building over to the next one. John tried to walk away. He was going towards his car. Timothy Pouliot, Mike Mendoza, and Trenton Nash followed him. There is no other definition of what they did. And while they're marching up the street, wagging their fingers, pointing at John and his friends, waving them off. So you may hear that people say, oh, they were talking back and forth. They were being combative. They were being combative as they were walking away. They were being combative as they were trying to get back to their car while they're being followed. John had to believe that he needed to use force to defend himself. Lethal force to defend himself, that he was at risk of serious bodily injury or death. A professional MMA fighter had expressed to him in no uncertain terms that he wanted to knock him out before the end of the night. And he had help. And they know that John is armed. In the moment, if you think that you're going to be knocked out, you have a gun and they know it, what happens next? In the moment, what do you think is going to happen next? His life was in danger. The judge is going to define for you what that is: serious bodily injury or death. Every step that every person on that street took towards the Soho in pursuit of John Delee was a choice. Everything that they communicated with their body language and the things that they said was a choice. And it started in that bar when Timothy Pouliot told Mike Mendoza to throw that punch. And it's tragic it ended the way that it did. But it is not murder. It was self-defense. And in that moment, when he's going to get struck in the head for the second time, he has no choice. He has to act. He has to defend himself. I submit to you that when you watch these videos, when you listen to what people have said, when you decide what everybody's intent was, it will be clear. It will be clear that John acted in self-defense and that his acts were reasonable based upon everything that had been communicated to him that evening. It is tragic, but it is not murder. Thank you.
Come get your boy. He's bleeding out. That's the extent of the remorse that he had. There was no fear. There was no terror, and there was absolutely no reason for the defendant to be in fear. He was bigger, he was madder, and he had a loaded Glock stuffed down his pants. This case is about the defendant's anger, the evolution of anger. You watched the videos. You saw it. You'll be able to see it. I agree with the defense on little, and we're going to talk about some of the things you've been told. But I agree, you should look at the body language. You should watch the reactions. You should watch how they're talking, how they're moving, how they're communicating. Because when you see that, what you're going to see is that this man was a bully. He was a tough guy picking on the little guy. That's who he was. Timmy had been pushed around. Yeah, he went up there and he wanted to fight. He wasn't afraid of the bully. And frankly, that just pissed the bully off that much more. This isn't self-defense. This isn't necessity. This isn't from fear. This is anger. This is absolutely retribution. This right here, the fatal shots to the back as he fell to the ground and bounced off the cold pavement, this is an execution. Absolutely nothing less. We talked about this in voir dire. Necessity is required. Actual and reasonable fear of the threat of imminent deadly force. That's not this. This is not that. You heard in this moment what this was. Mr. Saldana, and we are going to talk about his credibility issues. But what we do know is that he was trying everything he could to get the defendant to stop, to calm down, to walk away, to leave, because this wasn't necessary. Before we go any further, we need to talk about where we're actually at with this case. Not theories, not stories, not movie plot lines about people tactically maneuvering and everything else we heard at the beginning of this case. We need to talk about the facts and the law. We start this case, when you walk back in the jury room, we start this case at this point. The defendant pulled out a gun and he shot Timothy to death. That's not up for debate. The defendant knowingly caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. How do we know that he did it? You saw it. How do we know? Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that if at near point blank, you pull out a gun and you dump 8 bullets into them, into their back as they fall to the ground, it's probably going to cause their death. That's the starting point. Nothing less. You're going to be instructed to consider manslaughter, provocation manslaughter, recklessness. We'll talk about the law, but you know what recklessness is? You know what reckless driving is? This wasn't reckless. This isn't reckless. Boom, 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 boom. Continuing all the way to the ground. That's murder. That is knowingly causing his death. But John was in fear. Absolute fear. At least that's what we've heard. When was that exactly? When did we get any evidence that he was in fear? Did you see any videos that he was in fear? Let's talk about the points a little bit where maybe you would have seen fear. There wasn't fear at the bar. Remember? He looked over, he saw Abby. And why would there be? A foot taller, 200 pounds bigger. 200 pounds. And actually, it's more than that. You heard the stipulation. 350 pounds. 230 pounds. More than an average person, an average male in size on him. He towered over him. Feel free to watch this interaction too. I encourage you. And also watch the interaction when the defendant's ex-girlfriend pushes Timmy on the way out of the bar. Because what you'll notice is Timmy's reaction to both. I don't know what he said. It's your job to look at his body language. But yeah, Timmy brushed off the scum comment. He moved along. And another reason, and we already talked about this, the defendant was there with his friends. You saw Gage walk up behind the defendant when he confronted him at the bar. He had his buddies backing him up. But this is old reliable. This is the buddy that will never let you down. One squeeze, what was it, 6 pounds? 6 pounds of pressure. That's the difference between life and death. He had no problem pulling that out and using it. I lost count, frankly, of how many times you heard pro fighter. You've heard it a lot. Pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter. Okay. This is what the defendant did with that information. Where was the fear of the pro fighter? Where is there evidence of fear of the pro fighter? Because what you saw, and again, I encourage you, just like the defense attorney, go back and watch the video. Watch what happens when Abby comes back and tells the defendant. Watch the laughter. Watch them laugh. And of course they're laughing. I think Brian Delaney summed it up perfectly, didn't he? Remember what he said? Little dog barking at the big dog. Watch their reactions. But watch the defendant. Watch where he looks after that. Watch where he stares. Even amid conversation as they're having fun. Watch where he's looking. He's looking up here. Because this guy, this little scum, he dared to tell the defendant's ex-girlfriend that he thought he could hit him, knock him out. Who the hell does he think he is? I'll show him what's up. So he went up to the bar. Let's go, pro fighter. Let's go outside. Wait a minute. How fearful are you of someone if you're going to ask them to go outside? Pretty scared of that pro fighter, wasn't he? Let's go outside, buddy. Because what does he know? You have 200 pounds, a gun, and some buddies behind it. And when Timmy says no, he pushes him. I'm not telling you that that's the crime of the century, but make no mistake, counsel just told you that the first physical thing, he skipped over this. This is the first assault. This is the first physical aggression. This is that evolution of anger that we see. All right? It starts with walking up. You don't talk to my girl. Who are you, scum? Or you're going to tell my girl that you think you can take me? Hell no. Watch that video, and we'll see a short clip of it. We're seeing it. We're seeing that anger, the deep-seated anger. We've heard a lot about the punch heard around the world. And we're going to talk more about that punch, the claims you were told on Tuesday that you would see about that punch. But there is absolutely, unequivocally, no doubt that the defendant wasn't scared after the punch. We know that. You heard it. And I know sometimes it probably sounded monotonous because you heard us asking anyone that was up there, did he ever say he was scared? Did he ever say he was in fear? Did he ever ask for help? Did he ever say that anyone wanted to fight him? No, he didn't. He wasn't in fear after this. He was mad. You heard what he's screaming. He's swearing. He's challenging. He's demanding. What are we seeing? The next tick of anger. It's that evolution. It's spinning up. He's becoming more angry. More angry. Not fear. What fear? And we know he wasn't afraid outside, don't we? Because what does he do when he goes outside? You've had to listen to a lot of curse words and inappropriate language. But that's because those are the words he chose. You heard Mr. Enright testify. Where you at, pussy bitch? And you can hear it. You can hear it on the recording. Then it's out here. What's up? Who punched me? What's up? Who punched me? Where you at? Screaming. Fear? What fear? What fear? And Mr. Nash, all 130 pounds of Mr. Nash that we heard, you all get to judge Mr. Nash's credibility. You all got to see him walk into this courtroom. And you have heard the claims about this interaction. But we saw the interaction, okay? You saw what happened when Mr. Nash walked up there. Mr. Nash doesn't push him, doesn't touch him. No, we don't know what was said. We have testimony about what was said. But what we can see with our own eyes, unequivocally, defense counsel may characterize it as a push or a punch. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a punch. Mr. Nash told you about that punch, and it was a second punch. But that actually gives us some pause, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So now we have the first assault, the defendant. We have the second assault, the defendant. We have the third assault from the defendant. 2 punches. No death. No serious bodily injury. Outweighed Mr. Nash by 200 pounds. No death. No serious bodily injury. Because it's a punch, ladies and gentlemen. And there was no fear of that punch, of Mr. Nash, of any of it. Just like there was no fear of the pepper spray that you've heard all about. It is lawful, and you will see this in the jury instructions. It is lawful to use non-deadly force to stop non-deadly force. What does that mean? That means somebody is using non-deadly force, like punching somebody. It is lawful to use a less lethal, non-deadly force, like pepper spray to stop. Okay? That's what Mr. Mendoza did. He didn't even spray him. He walked up and told him to stop. And if you're wondering, well, what was his other motive? If he wanted to incapacitate the defendant with this pepper spray, here's his time. It's here. It's before the defendant has a gun. Mr. Mendoza doesn't know about the defendant's buddy, Mr. Block. He doesn't know about that yet. He's going to disable and take this guy out. It's right here. But Mr. Mendoza doesn't do that. And the defendant has absolutely no fear. No fear, and you know that. You heard the walked up the street. Is this walking or is this being shoved? Mr. Saldano explained that to you, that they had to push him up the street because he's trying to get back to Mendoza. He's not afraid of that pepper spray, and why would he? He's got the equalizer. He's not afraid of pepper spray. He keeps jawing the whole way up the street. That's not fear. That's anger. Watch the video. If you have questions about what happened in this time frame when the defendant walked down that alley, watch the video. Pull them up full size and watch it. Watch where everyone else is. All the way across the street. They broke off. They went the other way. There was no fear in Soho. This isn't fear. This isn't the face of fear. This is the face of a tough guy looking for a fight. But now it's amped up. We're seeing it again, right? This is anger, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't fear. And Mr. Saldano admitted the defendant ends up going around him. And you'll see the video of Mr. Saldano pointing for him to get out in the alley. Again, we'll talk about Mr. Saldano's credibility issues, about the whole he told him to stop. A little confusing since, 30, 20 seconds after Mr. Delee stops, Mr. Saldano was pointing for him like this to get out in the alley. I think we know what really happened during this interaction because we have it on video. But what we definitely don't see is fear. Anger, absolutely. Fear, none. Anger did this. It wasn't fear that made the defendant target Timmy and Timmy alone. You've been led to believe that the defendant feared Mr. Mendoza because he had rings on and because he had pepper spray. Every single bullet, 8 out of 9 bullets, hit Timmy. The smallest guy in the group, but the guy that had talked to his girlfriend, the guy that said he could knock him out, and the guy that stood up to him and punched him. Not condoning it, neither should you. But he shot Timmy out of anger, not because he feared him. Watch the video. We explained to you folks how, Detective Lovejoy explained to you folks how to use that VLC player and how you can go frame by frame. If you have a question about what the defendant was doing, take your time with it. But what you won't see is any deviation from Timmy. He followed him all the way down. Execution style, not self-defense style. He wasn't springing around saying, get back. It's like this. That's how it happened. Because it wasn't about fear. Now, frankly, that should be the end of this closing. That should be the end of me talking, and you should have this case. But there's been some misstatements, there's been some mischaracterizations, and we need to correct some of that. We need to talk through some of that. The defendant didn't need to call any witness. That was his right. But he did call witnesses. So you need to judge what you've heard and seen just as critically as you would the state. Let's start with Mr. Enright. Mr. Enright was a bystander. He didn't know anyone. We agree. He didn't have a dog in a fight. He was courteous. He was polite. He answered questions. He swore to tell the truth. But what we saw was Mr. Enright was not accurate on details that we know, on details that you don't have to speculate about. And we talked about this in voir dire, right? The difference between lying and just getting something wrong. All right, we all agree that there's a difference. Sometimes getting things wrong just happens. We all saw this, right? Mr. Enright explained that they came out of the goat, and there was a large group following him, harassing him. Some girls were spitting at him, swinging at him. And Mr. Enright said that after that happened, and after the defendant pulled up the gun, that the group ran straight across to the south, straight across to right here. And that's where they stayed. If you remember, I asked them, did they go up the street? No. Did they go down the street? No. They went straight across to where you marked the X. Yes. Okay. And that's where you heard them make that statement? Yes. Okay. So what we know, now I want you to think about the time. In this time frame, we have lots of people yelling about guns, right? We have Abby, the defendant's ex-girlfriend, screaming at the defendant to put the gun down. Remember, this is when the gun's out. This is after the pepper spray incident. Abby is screaming, put the gun away, put the gun away. Mr. Mendoza's running up the street, screaming, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. Did Mr. Enright confuse something? Maybe. But if somebody said that, it was over here, it wasn't Mr. Mendoza, it wasn't Mr. Nash, and it wasn't Mr. Pouliot. And also, how does that help you? How does that help us figure out what was going on in the defendant's mind at that time frame? There is absolutely no evidence that the defendant heard that statement. None. There's not even evidence that anyone near the defendant heard that. Mr. Saldano certainly didn't hear that. No one else heard that. So you're being asked to decide this case based on speculation that it was said, speculation on who said it, speculation on who heard it, speculation on how that affected them, speculation on why that would cause him to shoot him 8 times. That's not how we decide cases. That is not how we judge someone's guilt or innocence. There is absolutely no evidence that that played a role in any of this. But what is corroborated about what Mr. Enright said? What do we know is corroborated? We know that this was back and forth. Mr. Enright doesn't have a dog in this fight. He doesn't know Timmy. He doesn't know Mr. Nash. He doesn't know Mr. Mendoza. He doesn't know the defendant. He doesn't know his friends. But we know it was back and forth, and he said it was. No one was trying to back down. No one was trying to leave. No one was trying to ask for help. It was a back and forth. Defense in the opening tried to lead you to believe that this was a coordinated attack and the defendant was just scared. Is that what you saw? Is that what anyone described happening? No. So let's talk about a couple other things that you've been asked to believe. You've been asked to believe that Abigail Elliott Ward was a hero. That she was trying to stop Timmy from running up the street. Really? We have the video. That's not a question. Miss Elliott Orr ran up the street and pushed him. And sorry, I don't mean the first time she shouldered him in the bar and then dressed him down yelling at him. I mean this time on the street when she broke free of her friends and sprinted all the way up there and pushed him as physically hard as she could. That's what I mean, that time. The evidence is a little bit different than what you've been told. Mr. Saldano. Mr. Saldano came in this building and he told you some things. You heard some inconsistencies, and I'm not going to go through each one of them. But we have to at least talk about why you should give his testimony very little weight. If he said something and it's not on video, you should be very suspicious about it. We obviously know about his inherent bias. Friends from middle school, typical stuff. This is his buddy. This is the guy, they're tight. Now, we again talked about the difference between lying and making a mistake. Lie, lied, lying are very, very, very sharp words. Mr. Del Soldano, though, took this stand as a liar. He lied to police. And that may not sound like a big deal, but let's put this in perspective. Mr. Soldano, according to him, is terrified. More terrified than he's ever been. So scared that he ran into Soho Bistro. Ran in. Now, remember what he was afraid of. He is afraid that these three scary men are going to do something to John. And he is terrified. So he runs into Soho. But while Timmy is lying in his pool of blood on that cold pavement, Mr. Soldano is in Soho lying to the police about what he saw and what he heard. And the reason he was lying was because this was his buddy. He knew what happened out there. He knew how mad the defendant was. He had just tried to get him to leave. He lied to the police because he didn't want to jam him up. Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Nash were in the thick of it. You've been led to believe that they're the boogeymen. They spoke to police. They stayed. Mr. Soldano, I didn't see anything. Didn't hear anything. Really? You didn't see anything you thought might be relevant to a murder investigation? You're going to stand there and lie to a uniformed police officer who's investigating the murder of a man who's bleeding out in the street in that very moment? And I'm not going to go through, frankly, every single inconsistency. But there is certainly one that stood out. I told John to stop. You told John to stop. The day after, the morning after he has lied to police, he sits down with the defendant's investigator and he tells her things. Details, super important, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Left that out of the report, didn't he? Then you heard he testified under oath before. On this issue, he was handed that very report, and he was asked, is this accurate? Is this complete? Is there anything you need to add? Is there anything you want to add? Anything you forgot? Nope, that's fully accurate. He was handed a business card so that he had an opportunity, if he remembered something differently, to call. But then he comes in here and tells you, John, stop because I told him to stop. Does this look like telling John to stop? This is seconds after the defendant turns around in that Soho. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, I can't remember right now. You're more than welcome to watch it. Mr. Soldano didn't tell the defendant to stop. He was telling the defendant to go, which is what he was doing the entire time. And don't forget, Mr. Soldano did admit no one followed them down that alley. He admitted that when he apparently told him to stop, that Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Nash were across the street. How much sense does that make? You have to ask yourself, is there any reason to believe that Mr. Soldano didn't come up here and lie to your faces just like he did to that police officer that night? Again, if he told you something and it's not corroborated by video, you may want to look at the video. And let's talk about another claim you've heard. We have heard a lot about the punch. A lot. In the opening, you were told direct punch. That first punch, direct punch, caused the injury. That's what you heard. That's what you've heard this whole trial. He direct punch, direct contact. Okay, let's watch. There's Mr. Mendoza. Ooh, let's watch it again. And again. Now notice something about what side of the face he's swinging towards and what side of his body that punch goes to. Goes to the opposite side of where that cut is. But John's face hits this when he pulls Mendoza to the ground in the fight. Now, why do I tell you this? Why does it matter that there was a strike, swing and a miss? It matters because we don't mischaracterize. You need to judge this case based on the facts and the law. And the fact is that Mr. Mendoza missed. It doesn't matter. The state concedes. He went over there looking for a fight with Mr. Delee, and he got one. And Mr. Delee was kicked out. It doesn't change any of the events that happened after. But what it must change for you is think about the bill of goods you've been sold, what you've been told. You were told direct contact, direct punch. Mr. Mendoza's ringed up hand took him out. I think the quote was darn near knocked him out. And then he had this fear of those rings. Remember? You kept hearing about the rings. What evidence is there that that the defendant knew about the rings? How did that affect his state of mind? It couldn't have, because he didn't connect. Again, and we talked about this very briefly, the claim that Trenton Nash walked right up and, quote, got in the defendant's face, got in John's face. That's what you were told, got in his face, was continuing the attack. That's what you were told. So let's see. There's Mr. Nash walking up, smoking a cigarette. Mr. Nash getting directly in his face, continuing the attack, right? Only after he was punched by a guy 6'6", 350 pounds, he didn't so much as raise a hand. Didn't push him, didn't hit him, didn't kick him, nothing. Now, it's your job to judge credibility, character, all of that. It's not mine. You saw Trenton Nash come in here and testify. You heard his demeanor. You heard how he talks. You got a kind of feel for how he thinks about life and how he carries himself. Mr. Nash wasn't a threat to the defendant, and the defendant knew it. You heard a lot of questions about, did the defendant just tell you to go? And you heard that in the opening, right? The defendant told him to go away. Just go away, sir. I don't want anything to do with you. Okay, well, let's check the video. This is Mr. Nash coming over. Easily confused. I'll smash that fucking face. A little bit different than just go away, get out of here. No, it's a little bit different because this is what actually happened. Just like you heard, I think we just heard that the defendant was out of road. That's what we heard at the moment of Soho. The defendant was out of road. You went out there. You saw it. Out of road? Out of which road? He could have walked behind him 20 feet and gotten to the busiest road in New Hampshire. He could have walked into Soho. Because remember what Mr. Soldano said he did when he was in fear. He ran into Soho. Fancy that. A business is open, and if you're fearful, you can walk in there for safety. Something that just didn't happen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on going through the series of events, but given the back and forth, I'm going to spend a couple minutes just going through what happened, what the evidence actually shows happened, and then we'll talk about the law. Oh, my apologies. I forgot about some of the other claims that you heard. The planned attack, the tactical maneuvers, the lookouts, the hiding. That's what you were told on Tuesday. How much of that did you see? How much planning and coordination happened? And when did that happen? When did Timmy, 007 Timmy, have time to coordinate this attack? And what tactical plan did he devise where instead of taking Mr. Delee and spraying him when he's punching Mr. Nash, did he think it was a good idea to wait until he had brandished a gun and walked up to him in the middle of the street? There is a difference between what is factual and a characterization. And I encourage you to follow the facts and the law. This is where it started. This is what started it that night. The defendant up here and Timmy talking with his friends. If you watch the video, you'll actually see Mr. Delee come up here first, talk to a couple of the friends, and then he comes down. He walks up. This is where it's beginning. This is the moment where he's telling Abby, what are you doing talking to these scum? You know what happens here. This is where that tough talking Mr. Mendoza and Timmy are talking tough to the girls they've been hitting on all night. The ones that they were just embarrassed in front of, called scum. And they say, I'm a pro fighter, I'll knock you out. That's what they said. And Abby went and told the defendant. I already said this. If you're interested in the actual reactions to that, watch the video. You know what actually happens. This is what happens. The challenge to fight. Remember this? The big dog showing the little dog who's boss, pushing him down the bar like he's a sheet of paper. And then we know what happens. Mr. Mendoza comes down. I'm not going to go through that video again. You saw the swing. You saw the scuffle. You were told during closing that the moment before this, when the defendant had pushed Timmy and walked down to the bottom of the ramp, how happy John was, how he was just dancing and having a good time, right? That's what you were told. Yeah, of course he was. He did the typical bully thing. He had just walked up, flaunted his size, flaunted his strength, put this little scum in his place and slid him down the bar. And watch who's watching when he's doing that. And you will see Abby looking up there, watching, going like this. Ooh, stuff like this. He was happy because he just played Mr. Tough Guy. You know what happens here? We showed you. He comes out of the bar. He goes up the street. You heard Olivia describing the anger that everyone was trying to calm him down, but John wasn't having it. He wanted to finish this fight. Who dared to hit John Delee? Who dared to do that? In front of his girl? Think about how mad he was that Timmy was talking to his girl. How mad he was when Timmy simply said something to his girl. You're going to punch John Delee in front of Abby? And I can get away with it? And he wasn't calming down for anyone. You know what happens here. You know the pepper spray comes out. You know the defendant's tone and demeanor. You heard characterizations of it, but this is what was actually taking place. You also heard a lot of discussion about where everyone went, and it's all captured. I know it's not great quality, but from the parking garage that captures from the far right to the far left, you can watch all the movement. You can watch that and then the Soho video, and you can figure out where everybody is. But this is where everyone goes. The red line is John and his friends. The blue line is Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Nash. And whether you like Mr. Mendoza, whether you think he's a bad guy, it happened just like that. That's what happened. You can watch it on the video. That's where the people went. No one was following them down the alleyway. He could have kept going. What was it? They were going to their home, the safety of their car, right up here. On his way. The other guys are going the other way. But instead, you saw this. You saw this happen. You saw the defendant turn around. You saw him throwing his hands. You saw him pulling that gun out and hollering over to those people. Apparently in so much fear. He was so scared of these three guys, he thought it would be a good idea to be challenging them to come over. And as Mr. Saldana was telling him to leave, nah, I'm going to these guys. There is a gap between these two cameras. Call it the arena. He was going into that arena. They were out there. He was stepping into the arena because he wanted to fight, not because he was scared. There's no evidence of that. And what follows this? What follows the defendant entering into that arena after he has demanded to fight? After he has pushed people and hit people and used derogatory names, swore at people, had to be pushed up the street. What followed that is this.
These guys are awesome. Hey, get back here, back here.
Think about just how ready he was to use that gun. Now, you know he had pulled it out a couple times. How he had racked that gun. You can watch him on the Soho clip pulling out that gun. Think about how ready he was to use that gun to be able to pull it out that quickly, target Timmy, and put bullets in him all the way to the ground. To the point the detectives told you, and you saw bullets ricocheting off the paper. That's intentional, ladies and gentlemen. That is anger. That is not fear. This wasn't a spray and pray. Get back. It wasn't any of that. It's this. All the way to the ground. Execution. There's a question about his state of mind. The question about what was going on. You heard witnesses describe his state of mind. And defense is right. You did get a glimpse into that in that minute or so after the police got there. You heard what happened, and maybe you didn't pick up on it. So let's think and let's listen about how the defendant is describing his state of mind in this moment. Three fucking Manchester fucking scrubs, dude. You stood in that spot. You stood in that exact spot on the view. We asked you to turn around and to look around. He is standing 15 feet from Timmy's dead or dying body. His body filling up with blood because bullets that he shot ripped through his organs and his heart. And he is standing there calling him a Manchester fucking scrub. A lot of fear, isn't there? No anger, just fear. He was terrified. That is not fear. That's the bully. That's the anger. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you know, when you go back there, that he knew what he was doing and that he caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. There is a lot of charges for you to consider. This is what the defendant did. But we've got to talk about the law on fear, because you have been told John feared for his life. Okay. Let's start first with what's not self-defense. You can't use deadly force against the threat of non-deadly force. You can't kill somebody who is using non-deadly force against you. Excuse me. Street justice, and we talked about this in voir dire, just because somebody punches you, just as somebody pisses you off, just because they wronged you, doesn't mean you get to execute them. In retribution, those Manchester fucking scrubs, that's not self-defense. Deadly force is defined as this: any assault that someone commits with the purpose of causing or which he knows to create not just death or serious bodily injury, substantial risk. So not just a chance that it could do it, not just a one-off, a substantial risk. Now you may be wondering, well, how do we know that that's not a risk? Did Trenton Nash come in here and testify? Was he still walking, talking, breathing? Did you hear any evidence about any serious bodily injury? This man, who you saw stand up when witnesses went to identify him and towered over everyone, punched scrawny Trenton Nash in the face, not once, but twice. No serious bodily injury, no death, because that's not deadly force. That's a fight. Again, Mr. Mendoza has a different idea. He's from different background, from the street. For him, a fight is a fight. All right? That's what this was. That's not deadly force. Fear. We've talked about this. It's not just fear. It's an actual belief that you are faced with the imminent use of deadly force. The deadly force is right about to come upon you. You have to actually believe it, and it has to be reasonable. We already talked extensively. There was no actual fear. The defendant wasn't afraid of anything. And if he was afraid of anything, it wasn't reasonable. But again, we don't get here because we know there was no fear here. Excessive. This is common sense. We all know this. We agree. Use your common sense. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't use excessive force in self-defense. Only a reasonable amount of force. All right? This case, what happened here? In this case, excessiveness was the difference between life and death. You heard the medical examiner describe that for you. If the defendant had stopped shooting, if when Timmy goes like this and starts falling to the ground, that was the end. That's when the threat was over. So even if you believe he was justified in pulling that trigger, they can't use excessive force, and you own every bullet that comes out of that gun. There was no more threat, and he kept going, and he kept going. And as Timmy fell to the ground, he kept going, and he kept going, right to the point where Timmy's body bounced off the pavement as he tried to get away. And what do we know from Dr. Weinberg? That those shots, those ones to Timmy's back as he fell away, that's what killed him. He would have survived this one. He would have survived this one. He would have survived this one. But when you watch the video, take a look at what way Timmy falls. You'll see this, and you'll see this, and you'll see him fall. All of them while he was falling. And it did happen quick. It happened quick, though, because the defendant made it happen quick. He chose that. That's his choice. He's responsible for those choices. He's responsible for going like this and tracking Timmy as he fell to the ground and continuing to shoot until he took all of the life out of him. That is not justified. Now, you didn't hear anything during closing about provocation, but you're going to see you're being asked to consider provocation manslaughter. To be clear, the defendant did not act under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance, and he was not under extreme mental or emotional disturbance which caused extreme provocation. That's important. This is extreme. You're being asked to consider whether 5'7", 121-pound Timmy's single punch to the defendant, who was armed with a gun and outweighed him by over 200 pounds, caused such a reaction that it overwhelmed the defendant to the point that he could not consciously think about anything, that he couldn't understand what was going on, and it was purely a reaction without any thought, process, or any ability to react any other way. Another way to look at this is part of that instruction is going to tell you that not only would you have that, but that a reasonable person would have that. You all went through the jury selection process. You were all picked because you are reasonable, everyday people. You would have to believe that if you were in that same situation, you would have no ability to control yourself, that you would have such a rush, surge, emotion, and you'll see in the instruction, not just anger and not just hatred. This is beyond that. This is
instructed you on this in the past, but I want to emphasize it at this point. You're not to put yourself in either Mr. Pouliot's position or Mr. Delee's position. Your job is to review this case objectively, looking at the evidence dispassionately. So disregard the prosecutor's argument just now to put yourself in that position and guess or think about what you would have done in that position if you had been there. That's not an appropriate framework to consider the evidence in this case.
a reasonable person. So a reasonable person in that same situation would have had to been overtaken by such extreme emotion, beyond anger, beyond basic hatred, emotion that is uncontrollable. A reasonable person, not just him, but a reasonable person would have to react the same way. You heard the defendant's reaction. You heard that minute after he killed. You heard his first statements to the police. There was nothing about, I saw red, I didn't know what I was doing. There was nothing about, I don't know what happened, I was just overwhelmed. There was nothing about that. It was, they punched me in the face, I was defending myself, they threatened to kill me, and Manchester fucking screws. That's what you heard. There's absolutely no evidence that the defendant was extremely provoked to the level that a reasonable person wouldn't have been able to control themselves.
Dude, these guys are awesome. Take the fuck back. Hey, get back here, back here.
That's not self-defense. That is second-degree murder, and that is reckless conduct. If you go back to that jury box, and you're wondering about reckless conduct, listen to the audio from 54 minutes. Listen to the bullets whizzing down the street as people are walking across the street. That is reckless conduct, and it is second-degree murder. You've sat in a trial where you've been able to see what happened before, during, and after a murder. And as everything played out that night, you saw people's reactions, you saw their body language and their emotions, you saw the defendant's actions and his emotions. At the beginning of the trial, Attorney Harrington told you that you would see the defendant's anger, that you would see someone looking for a fight, and you did. that you would see someone with countless other options before having to resort to shooting Timothy 8 times. And you did. And she told you what you wouldn't see. You wouldn't see from the defendant at any point any fear. No fear of Timmy, no fear of Timmy's friends, no actual fear at any time throughout the night, because there was no reason for fear. And just like Attorney Harrington said, there was no actual and there was no reasonable fear. Timmy and his friends were unarmed. The defendant towered over Timmy. You know how much bigger he was. Timmy's punch was not deadly force, and he knew it. That's why he kept trying to fight him any chance he got. That's why this continued going back and forth. You saw the evolution of his anger, his rage, the jealousy, the bullying, the tough guy showing the little guy what was up. This was a bar fight. The defendant had a lot of choices that night. He could have walked away. He could have gone into Soho. He could have gone up the street. He could have punched him. He could have pushed him. He could have tripped him. He could have yelled out for help. He could have done a lot of things before he pulled out a gun and shot Timothy to death. He made 9 choices that night in that split second, all the way to the ground. And he is responsible for every squeeze of that trigger, every choice that he made. He chose over and over again to shoot Timothy. Those choices recklessly endangered every bystander on that street that night, every pedestrian, every person in a car. In those choices, shooting unarmed Timothy Pouliot until he was flat on the ground and dead, were the choices of knowingly causing the death of Timothy. And that's why we're asking you to find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder and for reckless conduct. Thank you.
Okay. So we just approach the contention.
Okay, sounds like time for the jury instructions.
Short recess. I'll come back and finish the instructions so you can start to deliver.
Oh, recess. Well, once again, no guidance on what short means.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, let's see. Okay, let's go back over here to the discussion about Chad Daybell saying he shouldn't get the death penalty. We are awaiting to hear what the judge's ruling is on if the death penalty should get tossed or the change of venue issue. He did rule that cameras will be in the courtroom and that the prosecution can argue disparate theories from that of Lori's, i.e., Chad is mainly to blame, or the main mind behind the plot. It doesn't really matter because if you're a conspirator, you're all equally guilty. So let's get this here. Okay, here we go.
And sexual control, and Chad was not going to act without Lori saying so. So what John Pryor has done, Chad's attorney, has gone through the transcripts from Lori's trial, and he's pulling parts out of the transcript and saying this is why Lori is more culpable. Lori did not face the death penalty. Because she didn't face the death penalty, Chad shouldn't face the death penalty because she was far more culpable than him. I'm sorry, I'm just shooting this on my phone to get the video out as quickly as possible. So he goes on. It's an 11-page. One of the filings on the culpability is an 11-page filing, and he goes on to say that even when two co-defendants are equally culpable, it's unconstitutional and unacceptable to subject one of them to the most extreme punishment available, death, while the other did not face that possibility. Now, if you remember, Lori Vallow did face the death penalty up until a few weeks before her trial. She did not waive her right to a speedy trial. So the judge, that trial had to happen. She was not waiving her right. Well, then the extra evidence came out, the additional evidence came out that the defense argued they didn't have enough time to go through it all. The mitigation expert, the one whose job is to work with Lori and research her background and basically argue about why she should not get the death penalty. She said that she would not have enough time to get that mitigation stuff put together. So because of that, the judge said, well, unless Lori waives her trial, we'll have to take the death penalty off the table because we don't have enough time to go through all of this. And that's what happened. Chad, on the other hand, has waived his right to a speedy trial, and his attorney has had since May of 2021, when Chad was indicted, to get this thing ready. So by the time it goes to trial, it will have been almost 3 years since the indictment. But still, John Pryor's arguing that Lori Vallow was far more culpable than Chad Daybell was in all of this. He goes through and he lists several reasons: that she manipulated Alex and Chad, she was the common thread, she led to the alleged conspiracy throughout the whole thing. He goes on to list all of these things about why Judge Boyce needs to take the death penalty off the table. And we have the argument, the motion that we've posted at eastidahonews.com. You can go read it if you want. And he goes through and cites, previous cases and how Lori groomed Alex and groomed Chad, and any death sentence imposed upon Chad would violate the fundamental constitutional principles requiring equal justice under the law, John Pryor writes, and would be unconstitutionally disproportionate, excessive, fundamentally unfair, and arbitrary and capricious.
How to open your car door while submerged underwater. A fatal construction flaw in all recent.
Mr. Daybell respectfully requests that this court strike the state's notice of intent to seek the death penalty pursuant to the 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And that is the argument. Now, what will happen is on the 29th of November, I apologize that this is shaky. Next time I'll use a tripod. The 29th of November, Pryor will make this argument. He will go into the court. He will argue why he doesn't believe Chad should get the death penalty. And we'll see what happens. There's also another issue that will be discussed: cameras in the courtroom. If you remember, Judge Boyce banned cameras about a year ago, September of 2022, ahead of Lori Vallow's trial and Chad's. Chad Daybell's attorney asked that cameras be in the courtroom. Well, at the time the cases were joined, Judge Boyce said, if the cases become severed and Chad has a separate trial, I will revisit this issue. So he is going to revisit the issue on the 29th of this month, November. And Pryor will argue for cameras. I can tell you that East Idaho News and some other local Idaho media have hired an attorney, and we will be in the courtroom to also argue on behalf of cameras. And whether Judge Boyce changes his mind or not, we remains to be seen. But it's an issue I've said before. We believe that you should be able to see it all, and that, that cameras should be in there. And we'd love it if cameras were in every court hearing. So that will be another issue that will be discussed at that November 29th hearing. It's possible that the Prosecution could also file some motions in the coming days that will be heard that day too. The prosecutors will respond to this death penalty motion to strike with their own argument, their own rebuttal, I guess you could say. And they obviously want to keep the death penalty on the table. Now, going forward, Judge Boyce has said he's going to set monthly hearing dates where, like with Lori, it was, I think, the first Thursday of every month at the same time, they had a status conference where they'd all meet, they'd see if they're all on the same page, so we knew when it was going to happen, if there was anything new that came up. Judge Boyce has said he will do the same thing with Chad's case. Should this go all the way to trial, which at this point it looks like it is, I mean, there could be a last-minute plea agreement or Chad could change his plea. This trial will, John Pryor says, be at least 8 weeks. It's a death penalty trial, so jury selection will take longer because there's a whole death penalty line of questioning, and then we'll have the whole death penalty sentencing phase, or sentencing portion of the trial, meaning there'll be the normal trial. If Chad is found guilty, there will then be the penalty phase of the trial where Chad's attorney will argue that he shouldn't get death. The prosecution will argue that he should. They will each be able to present witnesses during that time. And then the jury will come back and say, okay, he's going to get the death penalty. If he does not get death, he will get life in prison. There's no other option if he's found guilty and if this remains the way it is. So we'll know if a guilty verdict comes down, we'll know within a week or so or 2 weeks if he's getting death or not, what his sentence is. Unlike Lori, because death penalty was off the table, she was found guilty in May and then was not sentenced until end of July. So that's kind of the background. Anyway, there are some, the filings will, like I said, we'll link to. You can go read them if you're interested in it for yourself. We'll be in that courtroom that day on the 29th of November. We have requested, we've submitted a request to video it, to have a camera in there and to live stream it. We'll see what the judge says. He has not responded to that request yet. And so you can watch it if you want. Wherever you're watching this video, we'll have it on that day if he allows it. If he does not, I'll be in there live tweeting, live Xing, however you say it now, and posting updates on eastidahonews.com. There's where we stand. One other quick update on Lori. She remains in the prison. Governor Little in Idaho signed an agreement with the governor of Arizona to have Lori extradited back. But she still remains in the Pocatello Correctional Center. And Erica Stapleton at NBC 12 News in Arizona reported on Thursday that she learned that the Department of Correction or the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office has said they don't plan to bring Lori back to Arizona until all the appeals are done here in Idaho. That could be some time, a year or two. So Arizona, it sounds like they're waiting till all the appeals are done on Lori's behalf, and then they'll bring her back to Arizona. So the Idaho case sounds like we'll wrap up first before she even goes to Arizona. I haven't been able to independently confirm that, but Erica reported that yet on Thursday. So sounds like Lori could be here for quite a while. I just checked this morning; she's still in her unit at the Pocatello Correctional Center. So there's where she stands. There's where Chad stands. And we'll continue to follow it. Thanks for watching. Despite the shakiness, I apologize.
Guys, I'm about to blow your mind with this light bulb right.
Hey, everybody.
Oops, accidentally refreshed it. Let's see, I think I'm back over on, let me see, wrong tab. Okay, let's see if we've got anything else on my playlist that's pretty short right now. Got some stuff which is more suited for the verdict watch phase. Let's take a look and see if anything else has come up. Oh. Oh, interesting. Hidden True Crime is going to be talking with a Lori Vallow juror later tonight. That would probably be interesting as we are getting ready to do Chad's trial. Looks like it's still snowing very, very fine snowflakes, not with any real sincerity. Let's see, you've got more videos that are more links for Verdict Watch here. Let's see. Oh, I know. Let's get in the mood for Christmas here. Let's see, where is... Okay, here we go. Glory to our newborn King. Praise God and mercy on God and sinners reconciled. Joyful redemption's rise, joy the triumph of the skies. Let angelic hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Birds of peace, the star of righteousness. Hark the herald Okay, that was last Christmas at my brother's house. I think he said he has 90 ranks in his pipe organ. It's getting bigger. Okay, let's see. Break is going on longer than I thought. I have a video with the deputy that made the drive down to Phoenix with her. So that's, I think, a 12-minute interview. So I was saving that for Verdict Watch, but we'll definitely take a look at that because I'm curious to see what she said, whether she was trying to proselytize him or if she was behaving like a normal person. Okay, I've got something. That's 4 minutes. I'm not sure. Okay, let's look and see what's going on in the local news here. Oh, looks like this storm is supposed to be bigger than I thought. It's talking about a winter storm advisory. Let me take a look and see what the phone app says. I thought we were, oh. It is. Oh, an accumulation of 1 to 3 inches in the valley. I think that minimal to no known threat to life or property. I'm surprised that 1 to 3 inches warrants an advisory. Let's see what it's talking about for the accumulation. It's predicting 0.1 inch in the next 24 hours. I'm not impressed. Okay. Oh, the ACLU has filed a lawsuit on behalf of the homeless against Salt Lake City. Let's see what the gist of this is. It says the ACLU Utah has filed an amicus brief with the Utah Supreme Court on behalf of people experiencing homelessness in response to a lawsuit alleging Salt Lake City has created a public and private nuisance by inviting and fostering vagrancy on its property to the detriment of several neighborhoods and businesses, which it has. Because they're turning it into San Francisco. Now, a friend of mine works with some homeless people, and she says that the homeless don't want to go to the shelter because they're infested with bed bugs. And that got me to wondering, what does the jail do to avoid bed bugs? Because I could see that being a real problem with homeless people going in and out. Okay, that doesn't seem to be that interesting. I thought they were suing the city to say they should be allowed to be homeless. Well, I guess that's kind of what they're doing. Oh, we had yesterday. I mentioned that there was a carbon monoxide incident at a daycare. It says an industrial-sized power washing truck is believed to be the cause of the incident. So let's see what is going on in national news. Oh, a 3-month-old Alabama boy was killed by his pet wolf. A baby was found with horrific injuries in the family home. I guess maybe somebody thinks it's pretty cool to have a wolf. Let's see. Oh, we're still not done with the. Make sure that we're.
Bodily injury.
Oh,
The
okay.
term serious bodily injury means any
Just a
harm
sec.
to the body which causes severe, permanent, or protracted loss of or impairment to the health
Sorry,
or
here,
function
we'll
of
back
any
this up.
part of the body. So in this case, the defendant has.
Let's see. Looks like they're haven't got the sound. Okay. For some reason my audio or my tab lagged. Sometimes that's a risk of being on another tab.
And again, I'll remind you the laws. I give it to you in the instructions. This is the law you have to apply regardless of anything that you may have about what you think the law ought to be. Now, under the constitutions of both the United States and New Hampshire's own constitutions, all defendants have an absolute right not to take the witness stand to testify. So the fact that Mr. Delee has not testified in this case cannot be considered by you in any manner or in any way in deciding the outcome of the case. It's the state that has the burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defendant has no obligation to present any evidence or to prove that he's innocent because he is presumed to be innocent until the state convinces you otherwise. The laws of the state of New Hampshire set forth certain crimes, and those crimes each have a precise definition. And the definition of a crime is framed in terms of certain elements that the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So the state doesn't have to prove each and every fact in the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Rather, it has to prove each element of the definition of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And in a moment, I'll explain to you more precisely what the elements are of the crimes charged in this case. But in general terms, all crimes have at least two elements, intent and an act. So in order to determine if a person has committed a crime, it's absolutely necessary for you to know both what the person's actions were and what his intentions were. So unless the person has both acted to do something that's criminal and has acted with the required mental state at the time those acts occurred, the person has not committed a crime. So those two things have to coincide at the same time in order for the defendant to be guilty of a crime. And so in deciding, it's important, moreover, to keep in mind that the definition of the level of intent required by the definition of a crime I'm going to define that for you more precisely here, but pay attention to the definition of the level of intent because sometimes the law treats the same physical act differently depending on what a person's mental intent was at the time that act occurred. So let me give you an example. Let's assume you have two cases. In the first case, the evidence is the defendant gets behind the wheel of the car, drives the car, strikes a pedestrian, causes serious physical injury to the pedestrian. And in that first case, the evidence is that the defendant has the specific intent, purposely wants to run over and hurt that person and does so. Second case is the defendant gets behind the wheel of the car, drives the car, strikes the pedestrian, causes serious physical injury to the pedestrian. But in the second case, the allegation is that the defendant was negligent or reckless, like doing something, not paying attention or consciously disregarding some serious risk of harm. So the physical acts in both cases are exactly the same. Defendant got behind the wheel of a car, drove the car, struck the pedestrian, caused serious physical injury to the pedestrian. But the defendant is guilty of very different crimes depending on what his mental intent was when those physical acts occurred. So that's why it's important to pay attention to the definition of the level of intent required by the definition of a crime. And whether a defendant acted with the required intent is a question of fact for you to decide. Keep in mind, there's often no direct evidence of a person's intent because there is no way to examine the inner operations of a person's mind. So you should consider all the facts and circumstances and evidence in deciding whether the state has proven that the defendant acted with the required intent. So in this case, the defendant's charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and with reckless conduct with a deadly weapon. So the 2 charges of second-degree murder are what we call alternative theories based on the same underlying conduct. So the law provides that crimes can be committed in different ways, and the law allows the state to present alternative theories to a jury. So if you find that the defendant's guilty of both versions of the crime, based on the same underlying conduct, the defendant would only be sentenced on one of those convictions. And the crime of reckless conduct with a deadly weapon is a separate charge, an independent charge from those other two. So each of the charges against the defendant does constitute a separate offense, which you have to deliberate on and determine if the state has proven the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So the fact that you may find the defendant guilty or not guilty of any one of the charges should not influence your verdict with respect to the other charges. As I said, the defendant's been charged with the crime of second-degree murder, and the first version of that is knowing second-degree murder. The definition of knowing second-degree murder has 3 elements, and the state must prove each element of that definition beyond a reasonable doubt. So for this crime, the state has to prove the following. Number 1, the defendant caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. Number 2, the defendant acted knowingly with respect to causing the death. And number 3, the defendant's conduct was not justified on the basis of self-defense. So a person acts knowingly when he's aware of the nature of his conduct or the circumstances under which he acted. To prove the defendant acted knowingly, the state does not have to prove the defendant specifically desired or intended a particular result. What the state must prove is the defendant was aware of the nature of his conduct or the circumstances under which he engaged in the conduct. The defendant has been also charged with the crime of reckless second-degree murder, and the definition of that crime has 4 elements, each of which the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So for this crime, the state has to prove the following. Number 1, the defendant caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. Number 2, the defendant acted recklessly with respect to causing the death. Number 3, the defendant acted with extreme indifference to the value of human life. And number 4, the defendant's conduct was not justified on the basis of self-defense. So part of the definition of the crime of reckless second-degree murder is that the defendant acted recklessly. And to prove that the defendant acted recklessly, the state must prove the following. First, that the defendant was aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. This means there must be proof that the defendant knew that there was a substantial risk that his conduct would cause a particular result. Second, if the defendant was aware of the risk, there must be proof that he consciously disregarded the risk. In other words, the defendant decided to disregard the risk and took a chance that his conduct would cause a particular result. Third, you have to examine the circumstances known to the defendant. From what he knew of the circumstances, you must decide whether his disregard of the risk was a gross deviation from what a law-abiding person would have done. So here the keywords are gross deviation. If you find that the defendant's actions were unreasonable or thoughtless, that is not enough. To find the defendant acted recklessly, you must find that his disregard of the risk was a substantial departure from what a law-abiding person would have done under the same circumstances. It's not enough for the state to prove that the defendant acted negligently. That is, it's not enough to prove the defendant failed to become aware of the risk involved. The state must prove the defendant was aware of the risk and consciously disregarded it. Now, the crime of reckless second-degree murder requires the state to prove more than that the defendant acted recklessly, as I've just defined that term for you. For the crime of reckless second-degree murder, the state must also prove that the defendant's conduct occurred under circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to the value of human life. This means the circumstances must show a blatant disregard for the risk of human life. So if you find that the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant all of the elements of either version of second-degree murder, then the charge may be reduced to provocation manslaughter if the murder was the product of provocation. So like self-defense, the state has the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the murder should not be reduced to provocation. So the state has to prove 2 elements with respect to this. The state must prove, number 1, that the defendant did not act under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance. Extreme mental or emotional disturbance means acting with sudden passion, greater than anger or resentment, which so dominates and clouds the thinking that reason and normal control are lost, resulting in a killing. It does not mean merely a subtle hatred. It means being virtually swept away by passion and not in full control of oneself. It means that there was no cooling off, that is, no thought about and consideration of a course of action. And number 2, that the extreme mental or emotional disturbance was caused by extreme provocation. So the law which distinguishes provocation, which will mitigate an offense from murder to manslaughter, cannot be clearly defined. So reasonableness is the test. A murder is manslaughter only if there is provocation, which would cause a reasonable person to kill another out of passion. The law requires that the provocation must be so great as to reasonably excite the passion and heat of blood. Passion without adequate provocation is not enough. There must be provocation to the extreme so that the defendant, in the anger of the moment, kills another person. Mere words are not enough for extreme provocation. Also, a lawful act, even if it involves physical force, is not recognized by the law as sufficient provocation. So if you find that the state has not proven beyond a reasonable doubt all of the versions of second-degree murder, then you must go on to determine whether the state has proven whether the defendant is guilty of a similar but less serious crime of reckless manslaughter. So reckless manslaughter has three elements, each of which the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So for this offense, the state must prove the following. Number one, the defendant caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. Number two, the defendant acted recklessly, as I've previously defined that term for you, with respect to causing that death. And number three, the defendant's conduct was not justified on the basis of self-defense. So the difference between reckless second-degree murder and reckless manslaughter is that for you to find that the defendant committed reckless manslaughter, the state does not have to prove that the defendant was acting with extreme indifference to the value of human life. As I mentioned, the defendant is also charged with the crime of reckless conduct with a deadly weapon. So this crime has four elements, each of which the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So for this crime, the state has to prove the following. Number one, the defendant engaged in conduct that either placed or may have placed another in danger of serious bodily injury. And number two, the defendant acted recklessly, as I've defined that term for you. And number three, the defendant used a deadly weapon. And number four, the defendant's conduct was not justified on the basis of self-defense. So the state alleges that the defendant used a handgun as a deadly weapon. A handgun is not automatically a deadly weapon. Rather, the term deadly weapon means any object which in the manner it is used, intended to be used, or threatened to be used is known to be capable of producing death or serious bodily injury. And the term serious bodily injury means any harm to the body which causes severe, permanent, or protracted loss of or impairment to the health or function of any part of the body. So in this case, the defendant has asserted that his conduct was justified based on self-defense. So when there's some evidence of this defense, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's conduct was not justified based on self-defense. In other words, if you have a reasonable doubt as to whether the defendant's conduct was justified based on self-defense, then you must find the defendant not guilty. On the other hand, if you find that the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed all of the elements of a crime charged, including that his conduct was not justified based on self-defense, then you should find the defendant guilty. So the law distinguishes between the use of deadly force and non-deadly force. So the term non-deadly force means any assault which does not constitute deadly force. And the term deadly force means any assault which the actor commits with the purpose of causing, or which he knows to create a substantial risk of causing death or serious bodily injury. So except in situations that are not relevant to this case, all persons have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. So whether a person is lawfully entitled to use a weapon for self-defense is a question of fact for you to decide. With respect to the defensive use of a firearm, the following considerations apply. Number one, purposely firing a firearm capable of causing serious bodily injury or death in the direction of another person or at a vehicle in which another is believed to be constitutes the use of deadly force. Number two, if the defendant merely produces or displays a weapon, the defendant has used non-deadly force. If you find that the defendant responded to a threat which would be considered by a reasonable person as likely to cause serious bodily injury or death to the defendant or another by displaying a firearm or other means of self-defense with the intent to warn away the person making the threat, then the defendant has not committed a criminal act and you must find him not guilty. If the defendant's use of a firearm falls somewhere between numbers 1, 2, and 3, or is not otherwise covered by the definitions of 1, 2, and 3, as I've just explained those concepts to you, then it's up to you, the jury, to decide whether the use of the firearm constituted deadly force or non-deadly force based on the facts and circumstances of the case as you find them to be. So the defendant has a right to use deadly force on another person to defend himself if, number one, the defendant actually believed the assailant was about to use deadly force against the defendant. In other words, the defendant could use deadly force if he actually believed he was in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury by an assailant. Number two, even if the defendant actually believed that such danger existed, his belief must be reasonable. In other words, there must be reasonable grounds for the defendant to believe that the assailant was about to use deadly force against him. Self-defense does not require an actual danger to the defendant. Rather, the defendant must reasonably believe that the assailant was about to use deadly force. For self-defense to be justified, the defendant must have a reasonable belief that the danger presented is imminent and in the present. That is, the defendant must reasonably believe that the assailant's use of force is immediately forthcoming. The defendant must reasonably believe that the amount of force he used was necessary for self-defense. A person is not permitted to use excessive force in self-defense, only a reasonable amount of force. The defendant can use the amount of force which he reasonably believed was necessary under the circumstances so long as at the time there were reasonable grounds for that belief. The defendant is only allowed to use deadly force to defend himself if he actually believed the other person was about to use deadly force against him, and that belief is reasonable, as I've explained those concepts to you. The defendant is allowed to use non-deadly force to defend himself if he actually believed another person was about to use non-deadly force against him, and again, that belief was reasonable. In other words, a person is not allowed to use deadly force to protect himself from non-deadly force. Self-defense is not justified if the defendant knew that he could retreat from the encounter with complete safety. However, the defendant was not required to retreat if he was in any place he has a right to be, and if he was not the one who started the encounter. In deciding whether the defendant was justified in his use of force, you should consider all of the circumstances surrounding the incident. You should consider how the defendant acted under the circumstances as they were presented to him at the time, and not necessarily as they appear upon detached reflection. So you should consider whether the defendant had a reasonable belief that he was justified in using force when he acted in the heat of the moment. A past danger will not support a finding that the defendant was justified in using force upon another person. Self-defense does not permit acts done for purposes of retaliation, revenge, or redress. Sorry, I just saw a typo. All right, so members of the jury, the principles of law that I've given you are intended to guide you in reaching a fair and just result in this case, which is important to both the parties and to the court. So you're to exercise your judgment and your common sense, as I've said before, without passion, without prejudice, and without sympathy, but with honesty, understanding, and due deliberation. And so when you've considered and weighed all the evidence in this case, you must make one of the following findings with respect to each of the charges that are before you. You must decide if the state has proven each element of a charge beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have a reasonable doubt, in other words, if you have a reasonable doubt as to whether the state has proven any one or more elements of the offense charged, then you must find the defendant not guilty. If you find that the state has proven all of the elements of a charge beyond a reasonable doubt, then you should find the defendant guilty. Okay, so let me explain how this is going to work with the second-degree murder, just in terms of deliberation. So with respect to the charge of reckless conduct with a deadly weapon, if you find that the state has not proven all the elements of that charge beyond a reasonable doubt, of course you have to find the defendant not guilty. If you find that the state has proven all of the elements of the charge of reckless conduct with a deadly weapon beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty with respect to that charge. With the respect to the charges of second-degree murder, the process of deliberation is as follows. If you find that the state has proven all of the elements of second-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt, then you must go on to determine if the murder should be reduced to manslaughter, as I've explained that to you. In other words, the state must disprove beyond a reasonable doubt that the murder was the product of extreme provocation, as I've defined those concepts for you. If you find that the state has not met its burden with respect to that question, you should find the defendant guilty of provocation, manslaughter, but not guilty of the second-degree murder. On the other hand, if you find that the state has proven that the charge should not be reduced to provocation, manslaughter, then you should find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder. And I'll remind you that concept reasonable doubt is just what the words would ordinarily imply. The use of the word reasonable means the doubt must be reasonable rather than unreasonable. It's a doubt based on reason. It's not a frivolous or a fanciful doubt, or one that's easily explained away. Rather, it's such a doubt based on reason as remains after consideration of all of the evidence the state has offered against it. So your verdicts in this case have to represent the considered judgment of each juror. So in order to return a verdict, it's necessary that each and every juror agree with that verdict. In other words, you have to be unanimous. So when you've arrived at a unanimous verdict on each of the charges, let the bailiff know, and then you'll be brought back here to the courtroom where the foreperson will deliver those verdicts in response to questions that the clerk of court will ask of you. It's the foreperson's job to see to it that the jury takes up the issues that are before you. So he or she should see to it that each juror has a full, fair, and adequate opportunity to explain his or her views with respect to both the law and the evidence. And as your first order of business, I'll have you choose from amongst yourselves whom you want to serve as the foreperson. And then once you've selected the foreperson, just let the bailiff know so we know who that person is. All right, as I said, the case is important to both the parties, and in your deliberations, you must follow the instructions which I've given you and make a conscientious effort to determine what a fair and just result is, because that is your highest duty as officers of this court. It's also your duty as jurors to consult with one another and to deliberate with a view towards reaching an agreement, if you can do so without violence to your individual judgment. So each of you have to decide the case for yourselves, but do so only after impartial consideration of the evidence with your fellow jurors. So in the course of your deliberations, don't hesitate to change your mind or re-examine your position if you're convinced that you were initially wrong. But don't give up your honest conviction as to the weight or the effect of the evidence simply because of the opinion of your fellow jurors or solely for the purpose of returning a unanimous verdict. Now, if you have any questions about the law that applies, during your deliberations, have the foreperson write that question out on a piece of paper, put the date and time on it, notify the bailiff, and I will get you an answer most likely in writing as quickly as I can. If you have any questions though about the facts or the evidence in the case, I can't help you with that. As I've told you before, you and you alone decide the facts based on the evidence presented. You'll have the exhibits we'll introduce that'll go back with you into deliberation, and you'll have to rely on your collective memory about the testimony of the witnesses. And so there are 3 alternates. All right, so jurors number 7, 12, and 13. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think you're 7, and then 12 and 13. So the 3 of you are alternates. So I can't excuse you yet, because it does happen even at this point that a juror becomes sick, has a family emergency, or something happens, and 1 or more of you might be brought into the deliberation process. So it's essential you continue to abide by my instructions not to talk about the case with anyone else, but also not to talk about the case with each other, because it does happen. As I said, 1 or more of you might be brought into the process, and you need to come at it without those outside influences. And so the remaining 12 of you can retire to deliberate. We'll get you the exhibits, and I just caught a typo. I need to correct it. I'll get the instructions back to you as well. If you have a clean laptop, yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, there we go.
My concern was whether there was agreement about the description. I can't believe I didn't read through the description, so I just wanted to make sure there was nothing that inside the objection. But that's fine. This number of exhibits. Okay, as long as you're okay with that, then that'll go back. Okay, thank you.
We are officially deliberating. So, saying it's taken them a few minutes to walk down the hall, so. Okay, let's see. What did I have back in? Let's see what the. Take a look at my playlist here. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's take a look at this. Ruby Frankie's 5 revelations from divorce petition against disgraced YouTube mom. Yesterday, her husband filed for divorce, which, who could have seen that coming? I think that, what's her face? I'm trying to remember her name, the therapist type, Hildebrandt. Hopefully she has been had her license suspended as a therapist. So here we go. Let's see what we find out.
That I think could make massive improvements in your parenting and in your interactions with your children and with your spouse, and then is becoming aware and conscious of your motive.
Kevin Franke has filed for divorce from his wife, Ruby. Now let's dig deeper into the paperwork to understand what each side can and can't do, including with respect to the kids. We get into it with divorce lawyer Randy Kessler. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. What an update we have for you in the Ruby Franke saga. Kevin Franke, the husband of accused child abuser Ruby Franke, has filed for divorce. And before we get into this any further, we did do a previous sidebar on the divorce very briefly when the news just broke, but we weren't really able to do a deep dive into it, which we are about to do. So we're going to get into more of the details, the key details in this divorce filing, or what we have of this filing, with famed Atlanta divorce attorney Randy Kessler in a minute. But first, I want to give you a little bit of backstory. So Ruby Griffiths met Kevin Franke, and they got married, having their first child in 2003. Now, Kevin had graduated from Utah State University for undergrad and then got his graduate degree from Brigham Young University in civil engineering. He went on to teach engineering at BYU as an associate professor. Kevin and Ruby, they are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They end up having 6 children together: Shari, Chad, Abby, Julie, Russell, and Eve. So they're living in Utah. And you fast forward to 2015, Ruby and Kevin started a channel on YouTube called 8 Passengers. And the videos are all about their family and parenting, homeschooling, marriage. The channel became so popular that it had over 2 million subscribers. But those videos received a lot of criticism. Many felt the way that the kids were being treated wasn't right. Give you an example. Here's Ruby talking about how her young daughter, who I believe was 6 years old at the time, didn't pack her lunch for school, and it's her fault.
I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry.
And Franke would defend herself from all this criticism. Here's an example of a video where you can actually see Kevin in the video.
However, listening to all of your comments and your feedback, I think I understand where some people are coming from. They're like, oh, the parents don't give their kids beds. And I totally agree with that. I know there are lots of children out there whose parents are neglectful. We got accused of child abuse when we sent Chad to Anasazi. Guess what? The first thing that they did was take a bed away. They don't have beds. So Chad slept on the hard ground for months, and it's run by psychologists and therapists. And if not having a bed was psychologically damaging, then they wouldn't have suggested that.
Hey there, everybody. So I want to talk to you about something that I am so excited about, and that is that GEDmatch is now sponsoring Sidebar. Many of our true crime fans will know exactly who they are. I actually interviewed their co-founder a few years back, had a chance to meet them at this year's CrimeCon. I'm telling you, they were like rock stars. Everybody was coming up to their booth. They are just so popular in this industry. GEDmatch is the largest public DNA database, and since 2018, GEDmatch has played a crucial role in helping law enforcement solve over 1,000 cases, like the Golden State Killer, the NorCal Rapist, the Buckskin Girl. And it's really all because of you, because you take a DNA test, you upload the data to GEDmatch, and you become a genetic witness, helping identify serial killers or unknown descendants. It is 100% free to sign up and upload. And also, you get all these tools for your own genetic genealogy research, which is just really cool. This is a unique way that true crime fans can actually help fight crime. So if you want to learn more about the Genetic Witness Program and how to join GEDmatch, head over to www.gedmatch.com/sidebar or click the link in the description. Okay, well, now you fast forward to August 2023, and Ruby Franke and her business partner, Jody Hildebrand, they had been working together at an organization called Connections. It's like a service offering therapy and guidance. In fact, Ruby was titled as a, quote, certified mental fitness trainer. Well, they are both arrested and each charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. This happened after Ruby's 2 children were found in Hildebrand's home. The son, who actually escaped the home, ran to a neighbor who called 911. He was found emaciated with wounds, lacerations, evidence that he had been tied up. The daughter was reportedly found in similar condition. She was also taken to the hospital to be treated for malnourishment. And Kevin Franke has not been criminally charged. Okay. According to his attorney, Randy Hester, not to be confused with Randy Hessler, who we'll get to in a minute. Randy Hester, who we've interviewed a few times at Law and Crime. Kevin was distraught. He denies any knowledge of this abuse. He had been living separately from Ruby for 13 months before her arrest. Here's what Kester told us.
Kevin very much loved his children and loved his wife and had a strong bond, an exceptionally strong bond with all of his kids. You've seen pictures of their family together. He was involved in all sorts of activities. He was a great dad. But Ruby felt like there were differences in their marriage. And at one point, in conjunction with Jody Hildebrand, it was sort of like, we have to separate to save our marriage. We'll keep working on our marriage, but for now, if we're going to repair our marriage and be back together as a family, you have to be away, and you have to work on yourself and don't have contact with the kids. Don't have contact with me unless I initiate it. Oh, he was just horrified by what the reports were, and he actually went there to get his kids. When he found out about this, he drove all the way to southern Utah, which is 250 miles, and met with law enforcement and gave statements and made an effort to try to get his kids out of that mess.
Yeah, so according to Kester, Ruby told Kevin to stay away, not be around the kids. And when we asked Kester why Ruby and Kevin separated, he said probably shouldn't get into it, but they had a difference of opinion about their family, specifically parenting and their own personal dynamic. Now, when we talk about Kevin filing for divorce, that's a big component. By the way, Kester also explained that prior to Ruby's arrest, she actually called Kevin.
She had heard what was going on and knew they were coming for her, and called him and said, "This is an emergency." Even though she hadn't reached out to him for months and months and months before that, she reached out to him when it was an emergency, knowing she could rely on him to help his kids. All he knows is he got a text from her that said, "Emergency, need to speak with you." He was at work and text back and said, "I'm at work. What's up?" And she said, "I need to speak to you immediately."
Now, she didn't directly say the police were coming. Nonetheless, it's pretty fascinating that she called him before her arrest to come get the kids. Now, in terms of the conflict in their marriage, Kester indicated that Jody Hildebrand definitely didn't help the situation.
I don't think he's made that parallel. I don't think that he believes that it's what led up to this. But what I can say, at least it's my observation, that while the family may have had some struggles prior to Jody coming into their lives, it just kind of seems like to me, and this is my personal opinion, that once she got involved in their lives, it just destroyed his family. The focus has been on Kevin. Where was he? Why was he absent? How does that all happen? So he was doing that at Ruby's direction, who I think was being directed by Jody. This is the way that you've got to repair your marriage and repair your family. So they were all sort of kind of being manipulated. This is just my opinion, by Jody. And I think she knew what she was doing, and it was causing significant damage. And so when Kevin's critics are out there saying, where was he? He was acting at the direction of what he thought was a competent mental health care provider and advisor. And to me, the better question is, what kind of mental health care provider would advise a family and a husband and wife and a husband and or a father and children that this can repair your family if you just stay away from each other? And I'm confident that she told that to Ruby. I'm confident that the children were being told that, and Kevin was certainly being told that I know what I'm doing. You need to stay away.
And by the way, at the same time as Kevin filed for divorce, as we talked about in a previous sidebar, he is actually seemingly petitioning a state legislator in Utah to change the law in the state to create more stringent requirements for mental health counselors, seemingly implying, at least to me, that what his wife was doing as part of her work with Connections maybe wasn't right. But Kevin Franke files for divorce on Wednesday, November 29th, while his wife is locked up behind bars awaiting trial. And to talk about this, now let me bring in high-profile Atlanta divorce attorney and founding partner of KS Family Law, a 30-person family law firm in Atlanta, Randy Kessler. Randy, so good to see you. I think this is your first time on Sidebar. Am I right?
Yeah, I've been on with you for, it's been a while since I've seen you, and we've done stuff, but yeah, not on Sidebar, and it's good to be here with you.
Good to be here as well. You picked the name that couldn't confuse people more. This is Randy Kessler, not Randy Kester, who is representing Kevin Franke. Now, you've represented a lot of clients over the years, including celebrities and athletes. So Kevin Franke files this petition for divorce and a domestic relations injunction in Utah's 4th Judicial District. We are going to get to that injunction in a minute. First, talk about the divorce. We don't have any details. It's completely private. Is that normal that we don't have any details about the actual divorce petition?
Well, generally nationwide, it's not common, right? Divorce, public has a right to know. That's why, there's people in the courtroom watching if you want, open door policy. Utah has some special rules, and about 10 years ago, they said that only certain documents, like the final agreement and the final divorce, should be made public. But in this case, it seems like they wanted it sealed. They asked to keep it sealed and keep it private, and the judge agreed. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Of course, public speculation. I could argue both sides, like you could too, Jesse. Sometimes letting the public know, you find other witnesses you might never have found, so you may lose something having it sealed. But when you have high-profile cases, it's probably better to keep it sealed, keep it quiet, so you can focus on the law, the evidence of that case, not the public noise.
Is there anything in that filing that could jeopardize Ruby's rights in her criminal case?
It may not jeopardize her rights, but it may jeopardize her position. Is he going to be a defendant of hers? Is he going to defend his wife in the criminal case? Or are they on the outs? He's filing for divorce, so obviously something's not right in Mayberry. But, it's when you have a civil case, it's really interesting, Jesse, because in criminal cases, there's a lot you can't do, right? You can't take depositions, certain discovery you can't do. Now that there's a civil case, you can start to do a lot, and a lot will depend on how does he really feel about her? Does he want to help her in the criminal case, or does he want to hurt her? She's still the mother of his children.
But that's an interesting question, because let's say, we don't know when this criminal trial is eventually going to happen. But let's say he finalizes the divorce before the criminal trial. Could he be called as a witness against her? Because we know that there's some sort of privilege, right, between a husband and a wife, and whether they can be compelled to testify against another. If they are fully divorced by the time her criminal trial starts, what happens then?
So my understanding is that the privilege still applies as to what your status was when the conduct occurred. They can't say, what did you tell your then husband? What did you tell your then wife? They can both agree to waive that privilege. They may do that. She may want him to explain or to be an alibi or to say that I didn't do this. The reason this child was treated this way was because of some other person's influence. So, but unless they both waive that privilege, my understanding is you can only talk about things that happen when you weren't married. So things that happen after the divorce is finalized. So I think the privilege will remain intact for the relevant time periods.
What are some of the grounds, as far as you know, in Utah to file for a divorce? Again, we don't have the details, but what could be some of the reasons that he filed?
So there's two things, right? There's the emotional reason. Why does he want a divorce? And then there's the legal basis. And every state now has the right to get a divorce based on no fault, right? You don't need to have fault to have a divorce. And every divorce almost across the country gets granted on the grounds that one person wants the divorce. That's the no fault basis. So there are reasons you can get a divorce for a lot of reasons. Of course, Utah's got some special rules about maybe you can marry a few people down in Utah. But you don't have to plea that you want it because of adultery or because of child abuse or cruel treatment. That may be why he wants a divorce, but the judge is going to take the easy way out in the divorce. They always do, which is, sir, do you want a divorce? Is your marriage over? Yes. I don't need to know anything else in order to give you the divorce. And when you go to dividing property and money and awarding custody of children, then the judge can start to talk about, well, what did she do wrong? What's the misconduct? But as far as the basis for the divorce, all he has to do is say, my heart, I can't live with her anymore. My marriage is irretrievably broken. The judge is obligated to grant him a divorce. So, sort of an interesting nuance there.
That's interesting. I do want to talk about this domestic relations injunction that's part of this filing. So let me go through different parts of it. You tell us what it means. Part of the injunction emphasizes that the two parties, cannot harass, intimidate, or disturb the peace of the other party by any means, including electronically. What does that mean?
So it means you can't go out and badmouth. You can't post things and say the other person is this criminal and this horrible person. It's a very good order. But I do want to point out that this was granted, at the same time as he filed. This wasn't like they had a hearing and the judge decided one side had already done that. This is a preventative measure. It's a good measure. It keeps people from escalating things publicly or privately. But it means that you can't go out and say bad things and do bad things and paint the other person horribly, or you will then not only be doing something bad, you'll be violating that injunction. You'll be violating a court order. And then you're subject to the contempt powers of the court. So it is a powerful order.
Isn't she in a weakened position, though, because she's behind bars, right? I mean, he files while she's locked up. How does that change the dynamic of all this and what we're about to get into?
Yeah, it's sort of easy to be on the side where you walk in and say, Judge, I want a divorce. And the judge sees the other person in jail. You're usually going to look at me and my client and say, what can I do for you? Because you're on the side of right. You do have an advantage. And she's also got the criminal case pending, and her lawyer is telling her not to talk, not to say anything that might jeopardize that case. So it's a double whammy for her. She's really not, what's more important to her, her freedom, or maybe getting a little bit of alimony, or she's probably not going to say anything.
There's another part in the injunction that says they cannot commit domestic violence or abuse against the other party or a child, which I got to say, considering what she's accused of, it kind of sent shivers down my spine. Now, it doesn't seem that she's going to be in any position. Again, she's accused of abusing her children. She doesn't seem to be in any position to be able to abuse them further, right? While she's locked up. Although I do wonder what you take from that, because it's such an there's nothing different about this injunction. It's pretty standard, right? Pro forma, but
right.
That aspect, what do you make of that?
Well, it's pretty interesting. It's sort of like saying you are not allowed to do illegal drugs. Well, you're not allowed to do illegal drugs anyway, even without a court order. So it's really the court just reminding people going through divorce, especially these people, not only should you not do it, you now have a court order that you specifically shall not do this. And not only will you be punished for committing a crime if you do it, it's easier to punish somebody for violating a court order. It's a lot easier to say, look, the judge ordered you not to do this stuff and you did it. So whatever crime prosecution may bring against you, you're now violating my civil court order to not do this. So it gives an extra reason to be safe, and really just to err on the side of caution. If there's something that you consider discipline, you better be really sure that it's proper discipline.
Well, that's what's so interesting. People look at this case, and although Kevin Franke has not been criminally charged or implicated, he and his wife were criticized back in the day for the videos. So now the fact that he would never be like you said, if he ever abused the children moving forward, he'd get in trouble. But now that this has been put in place as well, look, from a PR perspective, I look at it as his attorney has come out and say Kevin had no idea what was going on to his kids. He was just as shocked as everybody. Now he is divorcing this person who was doing this to the kids. From a PR perspective and a legal perspective, it seems like the right move and not a surprising move. But there now seems to be, extra emphasis put on to the well-being of those children.
Right. I agree with you 100%. It sort of insulates him a little more because, when the fingers start pointing at him, and we see other trials where there are family members that get implicated. Well, if you didn't agree with what mom did and you didn't have anything to do with it, why are you still married to her? It's so easy in America to get a divorce. If you're so offended like the rest of us, just file for divorce. He has to check that box at a minimum, and filing for divorce certainly checks that box, insulates him a little bit publicly, and maybe, to the prosecution. If I was a prosecutor and he didn't file for divorce, why are you sticking by her?
Well, I do think it's interesting. It's not like he filed for divorce back in 2016, right? When they were both,
Right.
when these videos were happening. He said he hadn't been living there for 13 months, and she's with Jody Hildebrandt. So the idea that he didn't know what was going on, sees all this, it makes sense. And I could see how that could be an advantage. Now, this one I thought was really interesting. In the injunction, it says you cannot use the other person's name, likeness, image, or identification to get credit, open an account for service, or obtain a service. What's that about?
See, I love that one. I wish that was in every order and every divorce across the country and across the world, because what happens when someone files for divorce is you're allowed to take people's names off of bank accounts, and families may have a joint bank account. What happens to the person that's left without any funding? Sometimes they go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to sign up for a credit card, use my husband's credit or use my wife's credit. And that's just not right. That's what the court's saying is, don't think about it. I know this is common. This is something that's going to enter your mind because it's happened before in divorce cases. Do not go out. You now are on your path to becoming strangers. You will be legal strangers. You will be independent people. You can no longer apply for credit in the spouse's name. Truth is, even during a marriage, you shouldn't do it without your spouse's permission, right? But now it makes it a court order. It makes it harder to do with more consequences if you do it.
What about this one? They cannot cancel or interfere with telephone, utility, or other services used by the other party, and they can't cancel or change any shared insurance policies, like in health insurance or auto insurance, without permission from the other party.
All of these provisions, you can go to the court and ask for special permission to do this, or you can ask the other side to do this. I think this is really just a question of historical situations the court has found itself in, where someone comes to the court and says, Judge, he cut me off the cell phone and now I can't go pick up my child in an emergency. So now the courts have decided, the Utah courts have decided that we're going to make it that you cannot cut someone off with cell phone or text ability unless the other side agrees, or unless the court gets involved and says, okay, I understand why. Basically, we like to keep the status quo. Judges don't want to be dealing with little minor emergencies. Keep it the way it was. Don't change anything unless y'all can agree to it, or come to me. I'll listen and I'll make a decision as the judge. It sort of keeps law and order a little bit better than if you didn't have anything in place.
That makes sense. And we've been talking so far about kind of the what they can't do to each other. I want to talk about the children. So there's another part that talks about property and certain rules to abide by, but then it talks about the children. And it says one of the things that the Frankies are also prohibited from doing, or I should say, Kevin and Ruby, they are prohibited from making derogatory comments about each other in front of the children. They also can't influence the children about custody. They can't involve them in the divorce or do anything that would affect their love of the other parent. What about that?
So why in the world would a judge feel a need to issue such an order? You think that's ever happened in the history of people? It's just such common sense. We look at it as outsiders. It's not my case or your case, Jesse, but you look at it as objective people, and we say, that's common sense. Why would you do that? It's not good for the children. But being a divorce lawyer for 35 years, people do it. They say to their children, and also if you think your wife is bad or your husband is bad, you can get your children to agree with you. Some people think, well, see, I must be a good person because the children agree with me. You want to persuade them. It's not healthy for the child, but it's just common human trait to say, listen, I'm on the side of right, your mother's on the side of bad. And the courts are saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And now it's a court order not to do it. Not just common sense, not just good parenting. It's a court order. It brings it to a whole nother level.
The problem, if you had two civilians, I get it. But when you have one of those parents accused of abusing the children, she's locked up in jail. She's innocent until proven guilty. But you have potentiality of any of those children becoming witnesses, or Kevin Frankie becoming a witness. I feel like that complicates that prohibition.
There is a dilemma, because what happens, for instance, in a normal divorce, or even in this divorce, when dad says, I can't pick you up today, and the children say, why? Are you not supposed to say, because I have court against your mother? You want to be honest. You don't want to lie to your children. So there's a balance. And I think what the court is basically saying is, don't badmouth the other side. Don't unnecessarily involve the children. But obviously, it's okay. And what my clients use, and I try to convince them to use therapists and get some therapeutic help from a therapist to say, how do we address this with the children? What's best for the children? And I think if you say to a judge, the reason I explained it to the child because the children's therapist told me this was the best way to do it, or they needed to know, I think the judge would be okay with it. Just to go out there and say, I'm going to tell my side of the story to the children because I'm right and she's wrong, that's what courts don't like. And I think that's what this is trying to do. Don't involve the children unless absolutely necessary for some logistical reason.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated here. There's another part of it that I thought was interesting, where you can't take the children on non-routine travel unless written consent from the other party or a court order. She is in jail. Is there any way she can block where Kevin takes the children?
No, but now there's a court order that says she can. And really the reason for this, Jesse, is sometimes people kidnap children. They take their own children, they move, and they sit up in California or Oregon or wherever they are for a few months. And they say, well, Judge, I've already been living here. Why don't you just let me keep the kids here? That changes the facts on the ground. It's not fair to the other side. So they're trying to say basically, vacations are okay. If you have a Christmas trip that you usually do with grandma down in Florida, that's fine. But you're not allowed to change the situation so that when you come in front of me as the judge, I have to say, oh, the children have been in New York for the last 3 months. Well, why are we going to change their lives? That's not fair to the other side. So it's a generic, useful provision. But you're absolutely right. She's not taking him anywhere anyway. This can only hurt him if he had a trip that he wanted to take. He's now got to ask permission.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, because I am not a divorce law expert by any means, is there anything unusual about this filing or this paperwork from that you've seen in other cases?
I don't think so. I mean, the fact that it exists, and sometimes you have to ask the court to add a standard order. The thing that makes me think that it's not so unique to this case is that it went into play as soon as the case was filed. There was no opportunity. I don't think that the husband and his lawyer went to the judge and said, Judge, let me tell you about this case. I need some emergency relief. Put something in here. Had it been like that, then the provisions would have been against her. They would not have been neutral. So I don't think it's terribly, imposing that. It's not telltale that mom did something wrong and that's why the judge imposes. I think the judge just said, this is a divorce, some issues. I'm going to make sure nobody messes around.
We talked about it a little bit, but just to put a bow on it, why do you think Kevin Franke filed for divorce at this point in time?
Wow. In 35 years, I'm still trying to figure out why people file, when they file, what is that last straw? Sometimes I just woke up this morning and I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Maybe he was hoping against hope that she would be vindicated and that she would be the person that he loved. And he finally realized that wasn't the case. Maybe he's been planning it, or maybe he's just being strategic. I think if he wanted a divorce and he's known it, he probably should have done it a long time ago. There's so many different excuses and explanations, and the mother of their children. Some people don't want their children to grow up in a divorced family, even though mom's in jail. At least the children have an intact, legally family. It's impossible to answer. Just so many answers to that question. Unless I'm in the room with him,
Yeah.
It's hard.
But doesn't it make it seem like either A, he really doesn't believe her, that she, or assuming she's she says she's completely innocent, that he thinks she did all this, or B, he doesn't think she's getting out, or C, like you said, it could be a financial kind of benefit, a kind of financial kind of strategy. It just seems from her legal case perspective, based on what we're hearing from his attorney, and kind of the comments, that he is not siding with her at all.
Yeah, it doesn't help her. And you've covered so many criminal cases where the spouse is the one person that still believes in the defendant, and they come forward and they're giving interviews and they're saying he's an innocent man or she's innocent. They certainly don't have this anymore. This is not a good sign for her. I mean, absolutely. You don't want to be in jail when your whole world's falling apart, and then one more thing falls, which is, at least I have my husband. At least he believes in me. At least we're still married. Now that's gone too. It's just not a good place for her.
Randy Kessler, so good seeing you. Thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. We really appreciate you breaking all this down for us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.
Okay, just give me a minute. I need to do something really quick, and then I want to make a couple of comments about that. Okay, back to a few points that they brought up, like not speaking disparagingly of the other spouse in front of the children. That's called alienation of affection, and it's something that one can sue for in court. It is it's a legal tort, and it's quite devastating. My good friend that I mentioned quite a bit, his wife, they had just had it seems like that his wife, the mother-in-law, wanted to be a grandparent, so she encouraged the daughter to get married, and then as soon as the wedding was over, then she precipitated the divorce. She wanted a grandkid. The wedding was planned out by the mother. He couldn't even take her on the honeymoon where he wanted. They had to stay with mommy and daddy. And he had a great relationship with his son. And the ex-wife violated the judge's order and took the kid to Washington State and moved without permission of the court. And then she proceeded to alienate the son's affections, and then she legally she changed his name legally, and that was another violation of the judge's decree. And hasn't seen his son in 30 years now, or well, maybe it was 20 years. And it's really sad, because they had a wonderful relationship. You could see it from the photos and so forth. And yeah, you may not be happy with the spouse, but that's wrong to bring the kids in to the battle. So okay, let's take a look. Let's go back to the courtroom, and let me take a look and see what else we've got. Now, I saw something about a motion for a mistrial in the Young Thug trial. Apparently, a couple of jurors were shown coming in or exiting the courtroom the other day. And I don't think that's going to fly for a reason to have a mistrial. They just barely got going. And I understood jury selection took 10 months. At least that's what one thing said. Oh, let's see if we can find anything on this case, which is happening in Idaho. Okay, that's strange. I'm hearing some noises. I wonder if that's in the crawl space under the house or if there's a mouse has gotten in. Huh. Okay. Let's... Okay, it looks like there isn't anything on YouTube about that. So let's go to East Idaho News' website. Okay, here we go. Says mother's dead, Amber Alert issued for baby abducted by homicide suspect who is the child's father. And this is filed by Nate Eaton. It says this is out of Victor. Let's see where Victor, Idaho is. Okay, this is east of Idaho Falls, right near the Wyoming border. And Helena said that his vehicle was spotted and that he's headed south, so that could take him into Wyoming or into Utah. If he goes due south, it'd be Utah. But roads don't go straight, do they? Okay. Woman is dead and an Amber Alert has been issued for a baby boy believed to be in imminent danger who was abducted by his father, who is a homicide suspect. Jeremy Albert Best, 48, is considered heavily armed and dangerous, according to the Teton County Sheriff's Office. His biological father of he is the biological father of 10-month-old Zeke Gregory Best. The Teton County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call around 11:40 p.m., so this was yesterday, from a home at 4600 Skyline Loop in Victor, according to the news release from the Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher heard a disturbance on the line and the deputies went to the house. When they arrived, Kaylee Jean Randall, 38, was found dead. Her death is being investigated as a homicide, the release says. Okay. The question then is, were they married? Because she's going by Randall. That tends to suggest they weren't married. Not that it really matters. But it makes it a lot easier to leave if you decided you're not happy. Okay. Looks like a rather small town. Okay, Jeremy Best, Randall's husband, so they were married, took off with Zeke Best, and their location is unknown, investigators say. Jeremy Best is 5'11", weighs 245 pounds, has brown hair, that is graying, green eyes, and a graying beard. He is driving a 1995 Chevy Tahoe with Idaho license plates 1T39349. Teton County Sheriff is requesting assistance with homicide and child abduction, the Amber Alert says. Idaho State Police sent it out around 3:50 a.m. The child was taken by homicide suspect, unknown direction of travel. Suspect is believed to be heavily armed and dangerous. Please do not approach. Anyone with information on the suspect is asked to call 911. And we've got some photos. Okay, here's pictures. Cute little boy. Okay. And not the greatest photo. Oh, and here's the little boy. Looks really cute. Here's the suspect vehicle. Looks like they've had a lot of snow up there. And a shot of the Tahoe. So, and Talina texted me and said that the vehicle has been spotted heading south. So, and not that I expect anybody on here is necessarily going to be seeing them, but just in case. Looks like the Tahoe has a bad paint job. And let's go see what is on my playlist. Oh, we could take a look at this murder trial out of Colorado. I don't know anything about it. Yeah, let's do that.
Lungs, IV fluids, monitoring, and a thorough assessment you can only do in a hospital, making sure that kidneys and other organ systems were okay.
You were talked to about your opinion regarding sedatives in the field. It's not just sedatives in the field, is it, Dr. Bruther?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, is it the degree of the sedative in the field that you have talked about?
Sure, it is both the action of initiating sedation, but also the choice of medicines and how much sedation, but not so much a specific drug or a dose, but what is our goal of sedation? What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to just reduce anxiety? Are we trying to go to conscious sedation? Are we trying to go to deep sedation? That's how we think of sedation.
Should you do deep sedation in the field?
Again,
Okay, I just took a quick look. This is a case of a young black man was, I guess they were trying to arrest him, and he died, and sounds like the police and possibly paramedics involved. Let me take a look at that article again on Wikipedia. let's see. So he was a 23-year-old man from Aurora, Colorado. Was killed as he was walking home from a convenience store. 3 police officers and 2 paramedics were involved in the violent encounter, which led to his death. On August 24, 2019, 3 Aurora police officers confronted McLean after responding to a call by an Aurora civilian about an unarmed person wearing a ski mask that looked sketchy. 3 officers who were involved in the incident, Nathan Woodyard, Jason Rosenblatt, and Randy Roedma, all said their body cameras were knocked off during the struggle with McLean. That sounds kind of suspicious. McLean was forcibly held to the ground with his hands cuffed behind his back, after which Woodyard twice applied a chokehold. Upon arrival, paramedics Jeremy Cooper and Peter Sikuniak administered ketamine, later determined to be in excess of the therapeutic dose, to McLean to sedate him. While on scene, McLean went into cardiac arrest. 3 days after arriving at the hospital, he was declared brain dead and was removed from life support. Initial autopsy was inconclusive. So let's see, 9 months later, in June, after massive protests, lawmakers requested for a third-party investigation of the death. Determined showed officers posing inappropriately and reenacting the carotid restraint used on McLean. Taken at the site, he was detained and ultimately assaulted. The 1 officer resigned and 3 were fired. 2021, an investigative report ordered by the city council was released. The report said the police officers were involved in McLean's death did not have legal basis to stop, restrain, or frisk him. The report questioned the officers' statements, criticized the medical responders' decision to inject McLean with sedative, and admonished the police department for failing to do a serious questioning of the officers following McLean's death. Okay, so let's take a look and see. So Jeremy Cooper and let's see, who were the officers? Says Jeremy, let me see. Let's take a look and see who the second person is. Peter Chuniak. Now it's interesting because the Wikipedia article doesn't mention the Jeremy Cooper. Let's take a look at this again. Nathan Woodard, Jason Rosenblatt, and Randy Roedma. Okay, it's the paramedics that are on trial, not the police officers. Okay, well, yeah, it does sound like it was ultimately their actions which caused the death. So this sounds like they're talking about him when he's in hospital and leading up to declaring brain death. So let's listen now.
So I'd like to now turn to your assignment within Aurora Fire, and again, focusing on 2019. Are firefighters within Aurora assigned to a particular station or location?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you assigned to a specific station?
Yes, believe I was assigned to Station 2 at that time.
Where is Station 2 located?
12600 East Hoffman Boulevard.
And is Station 2 what is known as a double company?
Yes, ma'am.
And what does that mean?
We have an engine and a ladder truck in there as opposed to just an engine.
Okay, and what is the difference between the two?
Engine has the water, a ladder truck has extrication tools and the big aerial ladder for roof operations and rescues and things like that.
And is an ambulance one of the vehicles that you have within your company?
No,
So how do you get an ambulance to the scene?
they are dispatched with us to medical scenes through their own separate dispatch.
And is that how they learn that they need to join you on a scene?
Yes,
And when you're both dispatched to a scene, who has medical control over that scene?
the fire department does.
And are you always dispatched at the same time?
I'm unaware if the dispatch times are equal.
When a call comes in, are both units dispatched at about the same time?
I believe so. Again, they have their own dispatch, so I don't know if there's a delay in that, but we are dispatched together, yes.
And when you're within a station, how are you alerted that you need to respond to a call?
There are certain tones that come out over the overhead speakers in our station.
And do certain tones mean certain things?
We have just one tone for the engine and one tone for the ladder, and then there are tones for chiefs at chief stations.
And is Station 2 a chief station?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so it would just be the two tones.
Yes, ma'am.
And how do you know, as a firefighter or a fire EMT, how do you know that a tone is for you?
Like I said, there are separate tones for the engine. I am on the engine, so when the engine tones goes off, I know that's my call.
And are you permanently assigned a tone or does it vary?
It's been the same since I've got on.
Okay. So now I would like to turn your attention to August 24th of 2019. And what I'm going to be doing is asking you some questions and then kind of throughout the testimony using some body worn camera footage to help assist you in your responses, okay?
Okay.
So were you on duty August 24th of 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you assigned to Station 2 at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
And engine company, as we talked about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when you're assigned to engine company, do you have a particular role within that company?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was your role?
My role was the firefighter there. That particular night, though, I was at an acting position as the engineer.
And what does that mean?
I was the driver.
Is the acting engineer responsible for anything else?
Pumping operations on a fire, driving to the scene. On medical scenes, I would be scribing with a laptop that we had at the time.
Okay, so for a medical scene, you would be responsible for, I think you said scribing.
Yes.
What does that mean?
I have I think it was a laptop at the time. Now we have an iPad. If anything's said that's pertinent or vital signs or name, date of birth, anything like that said, I would scribe it down. And then for the PCR later, we would have all our information we needed from the scene.
Okay, and PCR, does that mean patient care report?
It does.
Okay, and are some of the fields within a patient care report auto-populated?
I believe they are, yes.
So on the night of August 24th of 2019, did you ultimately get a tone that night?
We did.
And it was an engine tone?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you know whether it was for a fire or for a medical assist?
Sometime after the tone, dispatcher's voice will come over and dictate whether it's for a medical or a fire.
And who else was assigned to the engine that night?
At the time, it was Lieutenant Pikachuniak, fire medic Jeremy Cooper, myself, and then the backseat EMT was Austin Bradley.
What does it mean to be a lieutenant on an engine?
You're the officer You're ultimately in charge of everything on the engine. It's a promoted position. It's kind of a position of leadership among the rig.
And do lieutenants have any specialized training?
They take a promotional exam and they do things that I guess we don't, but I don't think they have specialized training in fire or things of that nature. No.
Okay. It's more of the managerial leader type role.
Yeah.
And was Lieutenant Pouliot, was he a paramedic?
Yes.
Okay, so a fire medic that we were talking about earlier?
Yes, but he would go under the title lieutenant at the time.
Okay. But he was trained as a fire medic.
Yes, ma'am.
And then you also mentioned fire medic Jeremy Cooper. What was his role on the engine that night?
He was the paramedic on the rig.
And what does that mean to be the paramedic on the rig?
Every rig has a paramedic assigned to it, and that was his role for the day as a paramedic.
Does that give them any special control or responsibility over a scene when you're dispatched?
They typically run the medical calls and are in charge of the medical side of it.
And what does that mean?
If we go to a medical call and me as the EMT wants to do something, I would have to run it by my medic to make sure that's okay with him. So he is ultimately in charge of me, especially being the higher trained medical personnel.
And then you mentioned a fourth person, fire EMT Austin Bradley. So at that time in August of 2019, did he have the same level of training as you did at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was his role going to be on the rig?
He was the EMT on the rig, so assisting the medic on medical calls and a backseat firefighter pulling hose on fires.
So with these different roles, when you get into the engine, do you have specific seats that you need to sit in?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're the driver, so I'm assuming you're in the driver's seat.
Correct.
Who's in the front passenger seat with you?
It'd be the lieutenant.
Okay. And or does he have any particular responsibilities sitting front passenger seat?
He maps us into wherever we need to go, gets the notes, talks to dispatch through the radio, dictates kind of how we approach the scene, how we get there, and what our approach is.
And when you're saying how you're approached, do you mean with the engine or throughout the call?
More so with the engine, but it can't be throughout the call, yes.
And you mentioned that he's responsible for speaking over the radio. Does that continue throughout the call, or is that only when you're on the engine?
It continues throughout the call.
And where was paramedic Cooper sitting?
He would sit directly behind me,
And then EMT Basic Bradley?
directly behind the lieutenant.
So I just have a couple of questions about what happens at the station before your engine leaves. When you hear the tone, do you have any specific details about what type of call you're going out to, other than it's fire or medical assist?
Upon the tone originally coming, occasionally there's some notes. It could be a medical assist, a lift assist, or it could be a fire alarm, first alarm fire. But the real notes come later in the call.
So if it's a medical assist, how do you know what tools or equipment you're going to need on the call?
You don't know yet.
So how do you prepare the engine if you don't know what you're walking into?
Well, we bring everything on every call, so there's no need to prepare what to bring. If anything else is needed, like extrication equipment on a car accident, we would get those notes as we come in.
Okay. And so does that mean the engine is kind of pre-stocked with everything that you're going to need on your call?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it someone's responsibility to make sure after you've returned to the station after a call that it's restocked and ready to go for the next one?
If we use anything on the call before we go back in service, we will restock it as a crew.
And in order to make sure that you have everything that you need, is there like a checklist that you work off of?
We do have an inventory list, yes, but we're all aware of what's in our kits, and when something's missing, we check them every day in the morning.
And is it important And you said kits. How many kits do you have?
Well, I call them kits. We have an orange kit, a black kit, a blue airway kit, a pediatric yellow kit, and a cardiac monitor.
Okay. And in 2019, is that the same list of kits?
Yes, minus the pediatric kit that was just lumped together in our orange kit at the time.
Okay. And we kind of blew through that list pretty quickly. So I'm going to back up a little bit. So I heard an orange trauma kit,
That's correct.
a black kit,
Yes, it's an airway kit.
black airway kit. And then I heard a blue kit.
Yeah, it's more of a bag. It's an oxygen.
And then was it a cardiac kit or a cardiac?
We have a cardiac monitor.
Now I'd like to talk about each of those kits, bags, and monitors individually.
Mhm.
What is in the orange trauma kit?
There's quite a bit in there. We have everything related to trauma, a whole trauma kit, anything to stop bleeding, from combat gauze to tourniquets to sterile gauze, our patches for bullet wounds. We have splints and splinting accessories for broken bones, immobilizing, things like that. We have a drill for drilling into bone for access in case we can't get an IV. We have saline in there and IV kits, glucose in case we need to give a diabetic patient, things like that. And then we have certain drugs in there.
Do you also have things like a blood pressure cuff?
Yeah, we have basic vital sign equipment.
And what would those basic vital sign equipments?
Blood pressure cuff for different sizes. We have stethoscopes in there, a blood glucose meter.
And then the next one I believe you mentioned was the black case containing airway support equipment.
Yes.
What is in the black case?
That's our airway kit. We have our intubation tubes and our air tracks. We have our bag valve masks. We have chest decompression needles. We have our suction in there. And our eye gels, our backup airways, anything involving airway is in there.
Okay. And do you have like CPAP?
We do CPAP in there. You obviously know better than me.
All right. And then the third one you mentioned was the blue oxygen bag. What's in the blue oxygen bag?
It has a bottle of oxygen that we can use for oxygen tubing. We have our nasal cannulas, our non-rebreather masks. We have medication for asthma, things like that, for nebulizers in there.
Okay. And then the last one you mentioned was your cardiac monitor. So what does that look like?
It's kind of a boxy machine with two saddlebags on the side. Has our EKG limbs that we can use for that. Has a blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter. We carry our aspirin and nitro in there, some drugs. We carry patches in there, a blood glucose monitor, different sizes of blood pressure cuffs, and then cardiac pacing monitors for CPR, CPR puck.
And these 4 kits, well, I'll talk about the first 2 cases. So the orange trauma case and the black case, how big are those?
They're decently sized Pelican cases. They probably weigh 20, 25 pounds.
And you say a decent size. Just in case someone doesn't know what a Pelican case is.
Probably twice the size of that orange binder there.
Oh, so the white binder with the orange paper on top?
Yes, it looks orange to me from here, sorry.
And the black case is around the same size?
They're both the same size.
Okay. And what about the O2 bag? How big is that?
That's probably about 2 feet long.
And the cardiac monitor?
It's probably maybe the size of these laptops here. And then the saddlebags on the side add some.
Okay. So for the cardiac monitor, you said it has saddlebags. So is there kind of a screen on the outside of the bag that you can see while you're on scene?
Yes.
Okay. But for all 4 of these things, are they easily transported by hand?
Yes, between the crew.
Okay. So you're at the firehouse on August 24th, or you're at Station 2, excuse me. You hear the tone for engine company. What happens next?
We all go to the rig, and then the lieutenant will tell me where to go as a driver, and I'll go there.
How soon after pulling out do you know what this call is going to be about?
For this particular one, I don't remember the exact time, but every call kind of varies how long the dispatcher will take to relay the notes to you.
And relaying the notes, can that come over the radio?
Yes, that's over the radio.
And can it also come on the laptop or the tablet that's being carried?
Yes, not going carried in the MDC, which is a computer that the lieutenant has access to there, which has the directions and whatnot, also has notes of the call.
Okay. And so is that separate from what you mentioned the scribe would carry around the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is it kind of hard stuck into?
It's in a fixed place, yeah.
That was a better fix as opposed to hard stuck. So on August 24th of 2019, where were you dispatched to?
Just north of the intersection of Colfax and Billings.
As you're en route, are your lights and sirens going?
Yes, ma'am.
So now I'd like to talk about your arrival at the scene. Where did you park? And actually, if I could please have what has previously been admitted as Exhibit 301 displayed for the witness and the jury. This is the map. And if we could focus in on just the map portion of this exhibit. Okay, so looking at this map, are you able to kind of orient yourself as to what we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So how did you enter this scene? From which direction?
From the south.
South? Okay. Is there a laser pointer up there for you to use?
It's a laser pointer. Oh. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
You see that?
So if you can show the jury kind of what direction you entered from.
Enter from the street. We entered north going this way, south of the location.
Okay. And had APD actually asked you to enter from the west?
I don't remember if APD got on the radio and asked us anything there.
Okay, if I could show just for the witness Exhibit 281, which has already been admitted. If you can look at the incident narrative and see if that helps refresh your recollection as to which direction you were asked to enter the scene from.
Yes, it says here they asked us to enter off Montview.
Okay. And why did you, if you wouldn't mind putting the map back up. So why did you enter from Montview, which is north, as opposed to entering, or why didn't you enter from Montview?
I'm not sure.
Had you already started driving that way and Lieutenant Chikuniak instructed you to just keep driving the direction you were already going?
I'm really unsure. It's also possible we didn't get the notes until we were too close, but I don't recall.
So what does it mean when a note says PE2 had already committed?
That means we're already too far into the scene to approach from a certain direction.
Okay. And we can take that down. Thank you so much. What time did you arrive?
I don't know, ma'am.
If we could please display for the jury and the witness Exhibit 281, which has already been admitted. Do you see an arrival time?
Yes, first unit arrived 22:50, 4 seconds.
Okay. And we can take that down. Thank you. What did you see when you first arrived on scene? And I'm talking about when you're still in your engine and you're parking.
I saw a lot of cop cars pretty much shutting down the street, north and south Billings.
Was the ambulance on scene when you arrived?
No, ma'am.
And at that point, were you expecting one to arrive eventually?
Yes.
And that's because both AFR and Falk are dispatched at around the same time.
Yes.
Once parked, what did you do?
I reached back and I grabbed my laptop at the time and then get out of the rig and start walking to the scene.
And did anyone grab any of those kits we were just talking about?
Yes, the crew grabbed the kits as we were walking up.
And at that point, did you have any very clear information about what sort of treatment you were going to need to provide, or was that still unknown?
No, I don't remember any clear treatment.
Okay, so what kits were grabbed?
I believe we grabbed all of the kits.
Okay, so all 4 cases.
Yes.
And would it be a problem if only one case was grabbed?
Would it be a problem as far as
Well, why is it that you would grab all 4 cases before going to a scene?
especially not knowing what you're going into? Me as the medic, I grabbed all 4 kits. We weren't sure what we were headed into, I believe.
Okay, and is that so that you have the tools that you're going to need available close to you once you get there and know what you need to do?
Yes.
Okay. So you mentioned that the ambulance wasn't there yet. If they had arrived first, would they be expected to bring the kits to the patient?
Yes.
And what would you do as the arriving fire engine to make sure that the kits were there beside the patient?
If they're there first, we could radio them and ask them if they have all their kits or if they're in need of anything.
So if they needed anything additional, that you could bring it to the scene as well?
Yes.
Okay. And I apologize, I keep saying to the scene and to the patient. I should just be saying to the patient. Okay. And vice versa, if you're on scene first, could Falk radio to you and say, hey, do you need anything additional for this patient?
Yes, they could.
Okay. So as you all get out of the engine, you have your tablet to do the scribing? Okay. And did you run or walk to the patient?
We walked.
Okay. And what were you seeing as you're walking up towards the patient?
There was a lot of police activity, a lot of police cars. We were about a block away, so we couldn't get closer there. And then a big police presence, I remember walking up to.
So how did you know that it was safe for you to walk up to the patient?
I guess you never know if anything's truly safe, but police did call us in as opposed to staging us.
Okay. And when you say call you in, that means call you in so you can get to the patient and do what you need to do?
Yes.
And so do you get called in when the scene is safe and not when they're particularly done doing whatever it is they need to do with their suspect?
I'm not sure how they, what their protocol is for when they call us in, to be fair.
Okay. But if they ask you to stage elsewhere, is it because it's not safe for you to come in?
Typically, yeah.
Okay, and what would be an example of that?
If they had someone at gunpoint or they were getting shot at, obviously they don't want anyone else in the line of fire. So we've been staged on calls like that.
Okay. So barring that sort of scenario, are you able to come in and care for the patient?
Yes.
Can I help you? Your Honor, permission to use the bathroom for emergency use? Yes, why don't we take a quick break and. I'm sorry. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, and, you know, I'll just have the, my staff take the jurors back into the back. We've got 2 jury rooms back there in case anybody else needs to use the restroom. No former express any opinions, discuss the case, do no independent research, and avoid press coverage.
Okay, I've been trying to find out what's going on. The stream from the courthouse has ended, and I'm not sure what's going on. I tried calling the court just now, and normal court hours end at 4 p.m., so this is after normal court hours. And so I'm not sure if it ended because they sent the jury home, but there wasn't anything on the video regarding that. And so I've uploaded the app for WMUR, which is the local news in Manchester, New Hampshire, and enabled notifications. So if it turns out that the jury is deliberating still, that I'll get notification when the verdict comes in, and I can hop back on for that. So, I'm not sure exactly what I had the computer muted while I was trying to call the court, and took a few calls because the first phone number wasn't in service. So I don't know. I guess I'm thinking maybe we end the stream and turn on notifications so that if I get word that the verdict has been reached, that I can hop on live so that we can watch that. And otherwise, I'm assuming that it's back on Monday, but yeah, this judge doesn't seem to be that into communicating the lengths of breaks or things like that. And so I'm just shocked that the stream ended and there's no indication on what's going on. So we'll just kind of play this by ear, and maybe we'll see you later today, and maybe it'll be Monday. Anyway, I'm not sure what to do. I guess we kind of have this kind of situation with after the Henry Dinkins case, because we thought they were going to keep deliberating, and turns out they went home and we didn't know it. So I relied then on notifications, and I'm just going to start doing that when cases go to the jury watch phase, because I'm pretty sure that if it's a big case, that there's going to be notifications on it. So we'll see you later. Please do enable notifications, and I'll post as soon as I get word of any updates, or if there is indeed a verdict reached. So we'll see you soon, and if I don't see you later today for a verdict, have a wonderful weekend, and see you soon. Bye-bye.